Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman, and I have got an interesting show for you today. If you follow this channel regularly, you may have seen one of my guests, Truman, my mundane mind on Twitter, and also um, you're on Return to Reason, right? On YouTube and locals.
That's my
Um,
Grinder account also.
Right. And
Mhm.
he's been on a couple of times talking about a situation he's been dealing with his public school district, the one he was actually working with, he and the gentleman sitting next to him who will be introduced in a moment. And this is our third in a series of shows, but Truman's going to catch us up on what's been going on with that situation. And hopefully all of us can help bring this to a good conclusion where the good guys win and the bad guys get held accountable. By bad guys, I mean people who are mistreating children and trying to cover it up. So, what I'm going to do now is, after I ask you to please like and share this broadcast so we can get more people watching and listening. And also, please consider subscribing to the channel so you can be notified about content when I produce more. Um, please listen to Truman explain the background of this, and then we're going to get into what's happening now. So take it away, Truman.
Yeah. Well, first off, again, thank you, Deb, for having us.
Of course.
I'll introduce my friend here in a minute. It's actually, if you've watched any of these other videos where I've talked about this, you're actually familiar with him, at least in me describing, what's been going on in our district. But, you know, whenever, even before we went live and you're like, maybe do like a quick elevator pitch to bring people up to speed. My
Right.
mind just goes, I think I just had 12 aneurysms. Like, how do you even do that
Right.
with this kind of thing? But the simplest way I can put it, and I think you're going to put links to our previous conversations
Yes.
here. And a lot of this conversation will also maybe cover some of the stuff in the past is I worked for a school district that I was part of their behavior support program. And it turned out that this is something that's probably endemic to any school district or any behavior support program in the country. Okay. Because the incentives are the same everywhere you go.
Right.
But students who have an IEP, which is individualized education plan, or a BIP, which is like a behavior intervention plan, they are legally required to have services mandated to them by their school to help them succeed. That's really what it is. And an IEP is really just, how can we help this kid? I spent a huge chunk of my middle school, particularly in 7th and 8th grade, in a residential facility. There was no IEPs for kids like me. I got in trouble a lot. There wasn't anything like that. It was just like, well, you're an asshole, we're going to kick you out. And so that's all the IEP is. It's part of, I think it's protected under the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities and Education Act, to make sure these kids get the help that they need to be successful. So anytime you're going to create a plan like this for kids, you put a team together. First off, you do an evaluation to say, okay, do they have a disability? What is their problem? What is it? Once that's been established, then you put a team together to say, okay, how can we help this kid? And they would come up with, that's an IP team, come up with a plan for that kid. And it's not like some crazy anarchy, like every kid gets their own individualized thing. Like every time they answer a question right or don't throw scissors at the teacher, they get a cookie or something like that. It's a thing that makes sense. And so the point is that whenever you do that, you also have to have a way to check, are these plans being run? Are these teachers, whether it's the regular ed teachers or special ed teachers or whoever, administrators, following these plans? And the district that I was in, that I came into, Stephen had been part of that for, maybe 10 years before I even got there.
Right.
Had not been running those plans and also had no interest in doing anything about that. They didn't. It's one thing to be like, man, we're not doing this. We should figure out how we can make this better so that these kids are getting the help and the services, not just that they need, but that is legally required.
Right.
But they weren't doing that. And in fact, anytime someone, always historically being Stephen by himself, said, hey, these teachers aren't running it. We're doing these checks. They're not doing this stuff. And you're seeing these kids suffer. So what happened is, well, the kid keeps getting in trouble. And the teacher's like, well, none of the stuff in this plan is helping. And then Stephen might go and do an evaluation or an observation of the classroom and say, well, you're not running the plan. And then,
Right.
of course, it creates this whole other thing where they get defensive, like, how dare you tell me how to run my classroom, that kind of stuff.
Right.
Anyway, long story short, they weren't running these plans. And in fact, again, it's one thing to say mistakes are brought to their attention. How do we assess that?
Right.
Instead, they responded the same way any like big bureaucracy, especially with people at the top who, they don't want their credibility or their position threatened, responds, which is anything that might make me look bad as an administrator, as a teacher, as a principal, whatever. I just want that gone. I don't want to actually deal with the problem because that
Right.
acknowledges there's a problem that maybe I'm accountable for. And I don't want to lose my nice, cushy job. And most of these
Right.
administrators, in all fairness, have incredibly high paying salaries,
Right.
1-year contracts, year-to-year contract. They rock the boat, they piss people off in any way, they're gone. So I see
Right.
the incentive structure for them to want to maintain the status quo, or at
Right.
least, ignore some of these problems.
You also mentioned in one of the shows that they have an extra incentive to not rock the boat when it comes to staff who are kind of just upholding the status quo, because then they
Yep.
get in trouble with the union or they get in trouble with
Correct.
their teacher association and so forth. So, you know, if there's a large group of people who are organized for the purpose of protecting the mediocre,
Hmm.
right?
Teachers
The
unions, right? Yeah.
Right, the administrators will bend the knee to them
Yep.
rather than do the right thing because that could be their head anyway.
100%.
And any parent watching this who has a child on an IEP is probably nodding along listening to you, because this is not news no matter what state you're in. They don't run these plans.
Yep.
It just takes different forms, and the particulars might be different, but this is not news that they violate the law every single day.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So, um, then the other side of that is that whenever, over the course of, the 2018-2019 school year, and then 2019-2020 school year, which is when stuff really started to get tense in that program that I was in. So I was a support para in the most intensive room. Stephen is the psychologist who specializes in behaviorism, who is assigned. He's the one who created the whole damn program.
Mhm.
And whenever it's, and so, it's the two of us, I don't have a lot of teeth there, but at least, for some reason, they actually kind of treated me like I had a little bit more authority than I really did,
Right.
just because I knew what I was talking about. Whenever, we're saying, hey, this stuff has to be, you got to be following the law, you got to be doing this stuff. It all comes to a head. I've talked about it before. The school district ends up transferring Stephen out, or they suspend him first,
Mhm.
over a complaint from a teacher who, this is the teacher who I've mentioned before, is, I think probably well-intentioned, but mentally ill, has no business being with these
Right.
kids, who would throw stuff, yell at kids, look to
Right.
them to be her like emotional support,
Right.
unhinged. It shouldn't have been there. So we had filed complaints about her. She was never in the classroom with these kids. And then whenever a conflict arises between her and Steven, they both file complaints. He gets transferred or suspended and then
Mhm.
gets transferred. Remember, they transferred me also. They sent us the
Right.
emails about being transferred within 3 minutes of each other, but made it seem like it was nothing. And then they completely destroyed that program at the middle school. We were so
Right.
close. If it weren't for that one crazy person, um, we would have had a damn near as good as you can get behavior
Right.
support program in place. And they transferred me, and then they transferred me again. They sent me somewhere there was nothing for me to do. And then they used that as justification to not renew my contract, saying they didn't need me anymore. They did the same thing with Steven a couple times, but it's harder to get rid of him than it is a para, thank God. But now and he's continued this fight, continued to file these complaints, continued
Mhm.
to try and
Right.
get and hold them accountable. But
Right.
as I mentioned in our, I think maybe the last time we talked, the union that we were both a part of was absolutely useless. This is the same union that whenever after I lost my job, took all this time, they had told me, you got a good case and all this other stuff. But then at the end of it all, they said, here are some loopholes that the district could use to make it where you're not, or where they're not held accountable for what happened. So we can't support you legally, even though they admitted, yeah, they broke the law here, 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 and here. That same union basically did the same kind of stuff with Steven, couldn't
Mhm.
help him. And so he's just been stuck without any legal counsel or any way. Because the thing about these people and that anyone who's watching this, anyone who's watched your channel, I know you, can identify with is these people can do whatever the hell they want. Unless there's something to push back against them.
Sure.
They'll do and say whatever they want. It doesn't matter how wrong it is. It doesn't matter how dishonest it is. It doesn't matter how provably false it is, morally bankrupt, etc., or even contradictory to things they've said before. They can do whatever they want because there's nothing to stop them from doing that. And so that's been the position that I was in, and then I lost my job, and then I was really in. And Steven's been there. That's been his position. I had basically tapped out of all of it until in October, a former student of mine who ended up at the high school, and they failed him up there multiple times, literally and metaphorically. He tried to kill himself. And the way that building even found out was because of me. One of his friends contacted me over Xbox and told me. I told Steven, then he contacted the teacher and counselor at the high school, and they had no idea. So that happened. And then another former student, I think I want to say less than a month later, did actually succeed.
Right. I remember that.
And so that's what kind of pulled me back into it. And so is that at least a decent summary to where we are now?
Yeah. I think the question a lot of people probably have, especially if they haven't watched the first two, or even if they have, still what is so hard for people to understand is they'll think, but, do they really not care about the kids to this degree? Is it, are those incentives so powerful that they would willfully harm the children in their care? And, to which you would say, what? Because I know you've seen it, like you've seen it play out, but that's what I noticed a lot of people struggle with. They're like, but don't they see the harm that it's doing? And I don't think they understand that it's in many cases death by 1,000 cuts. In other words, the administrators can rationalize and come up with 75 reasons why what they're doing is better for the collective or better for the group or better for the organization or better for something, that they can push the individual children out of their consciousness. And that they're not tied either professionally or emotionally to the success of those individual kids. Their goal is reputation of the program, reputation of the skill, keeping my job, so all of these other issues. And it's not that they are consciously going, whoa, ha, 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 right? It's more that their incentives are in completely different places, right?
100%.
Than yours.
Yeah.
Am I getting it right?
I'll answer your question, and let's let Steven introduce himself.
Yeah. I just want to make sure we touch that, because I don't want anyone in the audience to be like,
100%. I think one of the things I mentioned before, and this is something that Steven had said, was, people they're looking for a bad guy. They're looking for pedophile or the Trunchbull from Matilda, right?
Right.
And really what this more boils down to is something that, I heard, I forgot what her name was, the woman who wrote about the Holocaust, but she called the banality of evil. And it's really like what you said, is that these people aren't just worried about the kids that might be on the list. Like if any one of them, if you said, why did you take this job? What got you into this? What are your priorities?
Right.
Of course they would mention the kids. I would imagine most of them would, right?
Sure.
The problem is that, as you touched on, the maintaining the legitimacy of their position, of this program, of this administration, is always going to come first. Protecting the reputation, all of that is always going to come first. And so what you end up with is these situations where, a good example is, so you have administrators, or superintendent, or whatever, who, whenever complaints were filed about the program at the middle school, they kind of have two options, more or less. Do something about it or ignore it, right? Investigate it or ignore it. And if they investigate it, then it acknowledges that a building under their care is having these issues, and it might be really systemic, and it might be a problem. And maybe a lot of it falls on a principal that maybe the superintendent vouched for, something like that. If they ignore it, then they can hope that it goes away. But then if it doesn't go away, then it just gets worse, because they're in a situation where if something blows up like it did at the middle school in early 2020, then it's, why didn't you investigate this? And now they look even worse. And so they always have to double down on the thing that makes it seem like that casts any doubt on the legitimacy of their position. So they're always having to do the math. I heard there was someone who was talking about, to bring it to just something that other people might identify with here, was talking about some doctor like who also did some writing about COVID stuff,
Right.
and compared that to I think what's her name, Michelle Walensky or something of the it was it CDC or
Rochelle. I think it's
yeah,
Rochelle.
Rochelle or
Yep.
yeah.
You're
Anyway,
right.
um, and they said, look, this doctor who's writing about stuff, the only thing he cares about is treating his patients. He doesn't have any other thing that he's thinking about.
Right.
Whereas if you're one of these people who are high up at the CDC or high up in the administration or anything like that, or public figure, you have to worry about not just, yeah, do you
Mm-hmm.
care about, like, you're not going to prescribe that people like eat rat poison, right?
Right.
But you also are always factoring in, will this look bad, reflect
Yep.
badly on me? Will I get bad press as a result of this and maybe not have my
Right.
position anymore? Will I get lumped will I get called a conspiracy theorist because I say, yeah, it's possible this came from a lab that shouldn't be controversial, right? So there are ways you can kind of map that same incentive structure that
Right.
people I think are waking up to this same type of thing where
Right.
there's always it's a multi-check system, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to, like, if you're a teacher and you're a good teacher, you're just going, I want to teach these kids math. Like, that's all I care about. If you're an
Exactly.
activist teacher, there's the multi-check. How can I inject my politics into it, right? But does that make sense? So I think it's what he
Total.
said.
Yeah.
This
That pretty much
different
covers
incentives.
it. I just, like I said, I felt like we should address it head on. It's kind of like the elephant in the room, because some of these things, once you break down what has happened,
Yep.
it's so bad that people, like you said, they want to look for the boogeyman. They want to look for the overt evil person, and it's not. It's lots of little acts of banal evil,
Let
right?
me add
People
something to
said
that.
nothing, they did nothing.
I'll add something to that. Eventually, the little acts of that banal evil or indifference, you might say,
Become big ones.
puts
Yeah.
puts you in a position to where you do actually have to start doing things that are overtly corrupt
Hmm.
in order, because you have to either break from your previous, like, narrative and statements and positions,
Yep.
which it's just like a lie, like it just gets harder and
Yep.
harder and harder to do, right?
Yep.
And the consequences will be more devastating than if you don't, right?
Yep.
And it does put you in a position where you do have to start doing those things. So, like I mentioned before, the principal at the middle school,
Yep.
I mentioned the shit that they did to Steven whenever he was doing this stuff, years ago. Bring him in.
Yep.
What are the things you love about your job? And then reassign him to do all entirely opposite things. Like, no one starts out there.
It's like, how do we get you to quit?
Right. And
I
so,
mean, it's
yeah,
like, what do you love about your job? Let's have you do, the
yeah.
bad things.
No, and then we'll get into another example of that, here in a little bit. But those little, one thing that I just say personally in my life is I think compromise breeds compromise and discipline
Yep.
breeds discipline. And these little compromises that these people make with themselves, or where they tell themselves a lie, I just want to stay out of it, or I don't want to rock the boat, or
Yep.
da 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 thing, or who am I? I can't take on the system, or whatever. That breeds
They
bigger and
catch
bigger
up with you.
compromises until they are, doing things that are overtly morally corrupt.
And I,
Yep.
I would add two things to that, Deb. One is the training for teachers. If you look at other professions, medical field, being an attorney, an engineer, anything like that, I think the training they get in undergrad and graduate school is very direct. They get used to constructive criticism, direct criticism, so they grow. And I don't think teachers are trained. I don't think that's the model in education departments. I think teachers, it's far more of a I'm okay, you're okay system, as opposed to actually giving critical feedback so they can take that and use it. So I think that's one difference in education as a profession, is they don't arrive expecting to take that feedback. Their rooms are sort of their own environments, and it's kind of a don't tread on me once I enter my room. And there really isn't any other feedback, even though principals do walkthroughs and observations. In many cases, those end up being, let's talk about 5 positive points, and this is something to work on, which is just fine. I don't think I'm okay with having the carrot as well, but it could be that it could have been the teacher really needed to work on 5 or 6, but we're just not willing to give that critical feedback.
You make an interesting point. I think a lot of people, and I went through a master's program that had a certification program, so an alternate path to teaching. But I do recall that there was a heavy emphasis on being a teacher,
Mhm.
not doing teaching.
Right.
So really no focus on instructional design, no focus on being evaluated for your skill set
Mhm.
as a teacher.
Yep.
There was a lot of emphasis on who you were as a person, more like these soft skills.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
all the criticism I got in my teaching job and even in my teaching program, my training program, was about my soft skills,
Right.
not hard skills. And that surprised me. I remember that surprised me because I came
Mhm.
from a different kind of background where I was used to getting criticized for my hard skills and being given specifics, this is what you need to work on, this is what you need to do. And it was just bizarre to me. So I think, yeah, people go into teaching and they see like, I am a teacher, like it's this essence that
Yeah.
I am. And you're a hero and all these things,
Mhm.
as opposed to it's a job that I do that involves a certain skill set. And if I don't do these skills well, there will be negative consequences. I mean, that's just something when you said that, I was like, wow, that's so true.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, and I agree. I remember reading an article about the teaching profession in the 20s and quite some time ago when they were starting public education. But the article was saying the reason why our teaching started off to be so high caliber was that the women who were physicists and had PhDs could not get jobs at Harvard and Yale and
Right.
universities, and they had to teach. And they showed up with no teaching degrees, but just their skills, and had to certainly
Right.
learn how to teach to a great extent along the way. But it was the argument from this particular paper on why we started off with such a strong educational system. And at that point, I don't think you had many people or any going through teaching degrees at that time.
Yep.
They were just bringing in their hard skills in their
Right.
discipline, and then
Now
learning
it's
to
the
teach on the fly.
opposite.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
it's, oh, you're not successful as a math major. You're not
No.
really being that successful as an English major, or
Yep.
you're never going to
Yep.
write that great American novel. Why don't you
Right.
go teach?
Right.
Those who cannot do teach, right?
Right.
That's the
Right.
saying that they
I
say.
hate to
Yeah.
say it, but just looking at who I encountered, and that's not to toot my own horn. I mean, I made the decision to teach very intentionally because I wanted summers off and I wanted lots of vacations and I wanted good benefits. I'm not going to lie about it. My goal in life was to be a mom. I wanted mom hours. I wanted certain things, and I love children, and I was like, I love learning and I love reading books, and I'm like, what a great gig that I could just be, surrounded by learners and help other people grow and learn and maybe be a better teacher than I had. And it seems like a pretty cushy job. I'm not going to lie to you. That's why I did it. But I had graduated from a program with a bachelor's degree in something academic that was
Right.
totally unrelated to education. So when I got into education, I was like, you guys don't know anything. Like, it just
Mhm.
struck me weird that a lot of the people I worked with didn't know the subject matter at all.
Well, that's something I've mentioned before, which is that what you see nowadays and what I encountered, and I know what we encountered is that you get the common thing with teachers. This is the framework, is that if a teacher can articulate a
Mhm.
care for kids or a care for their job, then that care will automatically be conflated with competence in the mind of the hearer. So
Yes.
if a parent is talking to a teacher and the teacher can articulate how much they care about that kid and how much they want them to succeed, then the parent hears, or the people hear, or the administrator hear, or the person doing the evaluation hears, well, they must be good at it because they care so much. And that is just, care does not equate to competence. It doesn't
No.
matter how much I care about airplanes. If you put me in the cockpit, I'm going to crash that damn thing. Right.
Right.
And on the other side of that, you get a parent with Munchausen's, Munchausen's by proxy with the kid. They care about that kid and they care him right to death. Or, a little kid carrying around a puppy, choking that thing to death. Yeah, they care about that puppy and they're killing it all the same. So care and competence aren't the same thing.
Very
Obviously, there's a
true.
relationship between that where you would think that if you do care about it, then you would want to be good at it. But that doesn't always happen. And that ends up being the big disconnect that I see with these people, is that
Right. And
care and
you've
competence.
even mentioned one of the people involved in this story was someone who could make anyone believe that she cares deeply to the point of
Yep.
tears, like on a
Yep.
daily basis, but her caring is a function of projecting her own issues onto the children. She's
Yep.
using the children as an emotional foil for her own problems. Like, if
100%.
I can get them to bond with me, then I've done something good, which is a sign of her own problems.
Yep.
That's
That's
You're
exactly right.
supposed to be mentally healthy when you're trying to go in and help kids with behavior problems. Otherwise, you're probably just going to make it worse.
So we're about 25 minutes in. We should probably introduce
Yeah, let's
Steven.
introduce.
um, so I'll say, anytime, if you've watched any of the other ones before, I've talked about someone who I use the term Seth. as a pseudonym, because I always used fake names and all of this stuff. And we'll get into why, using his real name and what's going on right now.
Right.
But he's the person who I remember I think maybe the last time we spoke, whenever I said, or I know it might have been the first time, where I said, in order to really tell this story, we have to go back before I even arrived on the scene and everything that happened before that. And I basically spent about an hour or so talking just about what had happened with him before I got there.
Right.
So
he is Seth.
Yeah. So Stephen, why don't you introduce yourself and tell people who you are?
So I'm Stephen, and I am, an accredited school psychologist by trade. And my job for my current employer, the school district, is a little bit different than the traditional school psychologist. I build mental health systems and behavioral systems, train people, set those levels, tiers up. One of the things that's always been important for me is to try to not just build it and tell people how to do it, but I put myself in that system for several years, and I'm in the classroom. I co-teach. I do trainings, cognitive behavioral therapy groups, but I'm there and working directly with the kids in the program that we're getting set up in to build trust and to model, to show people that I make my share of mistakes, but this is kind of the way we need to do this, and this is the way we get better incrementally at this. Acknowledging that it's a really tough job. Many of the kids that I've worked with, that Truman has worked with, are highly mentally ill. And even at the level we were working with most currently, these kiddos would often be in residential placement facilities. And that was the point of getting this program started, was to reduce the number of kids we were sending out, so that was my job in general. Most school psychologists are educated in a consultation model where they kind of they test and place children, and then the way they help, and not necessarily their fault, just the way they're trained, is to sit at tables and talk to people about how to help kids. They describe what teachers need to go do to help kids, but they're not usually associated with the actual training and the monitoring of those programs to make sure teachers can run the plans well, and the kids are improving. So the consultative model is not a hands-on model for the most part. Certainly you've got some psychologists that do counseling and such, and teacher training. But I try to be in the classroom, in context training, in context observations, to model and give that feedback. And so that's what brought me to my current school district. I was in that test and place model prior, about 15 years ago. And I met the superintendent here in my current district, working for at the state level, putting together our model for tiered behavioral systems and our manual. And she offered me a job, and I came over primarily as a behavioral school psychologist to work on mental health systems. And so unique, I was not enjoying my job in test and place. I knew that what I did was just meant to move a kid from one finance pool to the next, that there was really nothing in my report that was helping the child. It was just something that I had to do based on federal requirements. And so I like the hands-on approach. And I do a number of independent evaluations for a local attorney in town too, for parents across the state who are having trouble with their school districts. And so I go in and do those evaluations and report out, go to due process meetings and things of that nature. So that is that's my job to date, and kind of why I moved here. And today I'm kind of, three things, kind of presenting information for a number of reasons. One is I'm a mandatory reporter. When I see things that are going on with kids, and when I'm trying to help schools correct those things, when they don't correct them and the kid might be suffering because of that, one is that I have to speak up. That's something that I need to do if it's educational neglect. Part of my job. Go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say that's something that a lot of people aren't aware of. We parents understand the mandatory reporting responsibility for reporting things that you see or hear that might trace back to the home.
Right.
But what people don't really understand is that you're also a mandatory reporting agent against your own.
Correct.
You have an obligation, as do the people who work with you and so forth, to report when there's neglect right there in the system. Correct. So everybody is supposed to be kept honest. And I just wanted to point that out, because I don't know that people are aware of that.
Well, and I agree that we look at that as educational neglect, as a parent that doesn't send their child to school.
Exactly.
But if you don't implement federally mandated behavior plans and kids aren't growing, I think there's a great argument for educational neglect there.
Of course.
I also have a directive from my district that I sort of help organize to collect fidelity check information, right? And so it is part of my job, part of my duties, where I look at systems in terms of if the system is functioning correctly and set up well, and provide feedback on the system. And then I look at individual teachers and plans, where the result of that is always to then provide assistance to the building or the teacher to get better at what they're doing. I don't write reports outside of trying to help educators that I send into the school board where, people would get terminated or be on report for something of that nature. But I have that as part of my job. And then, I have protected speech as a person who might complain about a district that is not following through with a protected group of kids in special education, right? So all of those things certainly give me the basis and platform then for speaking to you today, for having to complain in my school district. And I wanted to say just one thing, one more point about what we were discussing earlier in terms of why we get to this point in giving feedback. For the most part, I can do an observation and talk to an educator directly, and maybe talk to a principal directly, and we can talk about ways to model and improve a plan. That isn't typically an issue, but it also doesn't really expose anybody to termination or embarrassment either. It's at a building level, teacher, principal level. It's really when I've collected fidelity data on plans and I'm asked to come to an IEP meeting to give advice on a child, and they want to take the kiddo out of regular ed and send them down to a more isolated program. And they've got all their reasons, the kid throws a chair or is argumentative, disturbing others. When I have the data to show, we don't know if this kid needs to be in that other program because I've got data that shows the plan's not being run. We don't have any idea where the child would be if we were actually running the plan.
And the fidelity audit kind of thing is checking that. That's what
it
fidelity
is. Yeah.
means.
I walk into the
are
classroom,
you being true to the plan?
You bet. I walk into the classroom with the plan. And I've done that in different ways, but it's basically yes or no, did this happen? And then I tally a percentage, simple enough to give feedback. I couldn't use that to publish an article, but it's good enough to give feedback to teachers for growth. But when they want to make a big change with a child, and often this kiddo is very frustrating, and I get that, and so what happens when I step in is one is I have to give that information to a team of people, including the parent. And the teacher may be sitting there. And so suddenly it becomes very embarrassing. I think suddenly the principal begins to realize that I just wrote a report that becomes part of the IEP that can be checked later. And so these are violations of federal law. And so the consequences or potential consequences begin to ramp up a little bit at that point, because everybody now knows. And it really is at that level. And often things don't get better after that level either. And it really is at that level that I think that tension rises. And more often than not, I'm a bit of an outsider in my job because I'm not a teacher in the classroom. And so I have found that it's much easier to remove the irritants, which would be me, if you will, and send me to another school every couple of years when this eventually builds to the point where it's obvious that a building is not running plans on a regular basis, ongoing, with often hundreds of fidelity checks. I mean, these stack up, certainly. And I think those are just some other reasons why this becomes intensive, that when it becomes personal or fearful, or if the educator doesn't feel like with my information, they can't move that kiddo that's tearing their room apart out of the classroom quickly, then I think the sights get set on the people or person who's bringing the information that is forcing them to take a look at themselves.
Well, can I also add onto that really fast? It's not just the teachers. This is where some of the administrators get involved, is because this might be a classroom where the parents are calling in and saying, why is this kid still in this science room, disrupting my kid's educational experience? And the principal's having to answer these questions. And so the incentive is on the principal, who's like, I just got to get the problem out of there, the irritant. The teacher's like, I just want to teach this class, whatever. But the point that Steven's making here is maybe it is the right thing to move that kid out. The problem is we don't know.
Right.
And until you follow these plans, instead of just taking the path of least resistance, because guess what? What they're doing is just shoving them out of an educational environment. they're basically giving up on them in a lot of ways, because a lot of these behavior
Mhm.
support rooms, it's just a glorified babysitting room where they'll sit in
Right.
there and lay on the floor all day, and they're not actually having their issues dealt with. And so the incentive is always to just get rid of them as fast as possible. And it might be the right answer, but the way they go about it, we don't know. And it's the fact that they don't really care enough to know if they should, if it is, to find out, like, if it is,
Right.
where you see where those incentives again are screwed up. It's like they need
Right.
to be able to weigh that and go, yeah, maybe this is going to be hard for a little while we figure this out. And these
Right.
other students are going to have to understand that, and the parents are going to have to understand it. Also, it's the law, but it's also the right thing to do by this kid. Like, we want to help this
Right.
kid. Our
It's
obligation
an
is
it
all these kids, not just
and there's no middle ground. There's no alternative. Like it's sort of highlighting some of the problems inherent in the system.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, it's easier to get rid of you. Like, you're one person.
Yep.
And then the principal in the building has, all these staff members, the other behavioral people, all these different people. And we know there's a teacher shortage. We know that teachers, like I said, have their association backing them up. Even the people who work in the behavioral, the para capacity or other capacities, they're not easy to come by. It's not like there's a line out the door of people applying for these jobs. It's kind of it's a tough job on a good day. And so it does become the path of least resistance. I've got, maybe there's 50 people yelling in the phone, being like, do something, get rid of this kid. And then in comes Steven and says, well, we don't know because they didn't actually follow the plan. So until we follow the plan, which is not only the law mandates that you do that, but it's, as you point out, the right thing to do for all concerned. We don't know. So you're trying to do your job, and it's everything's stacked against you. So, and then of course we know the sad outcome for some of these kids is what Truman pointed out at the outset of the show, that if they are removed and failed in every which way and shoved to the side, the outcome for them could be deadly. I mean,
Yeah.
you're talking about kids who either turn on themselves or, God forbid, turn on other people.
Yep.
Right? I mean, these are life-altering decisions. It's a human being that you're shoving to the side.
Right.
And like I said, it is a problem inherent in the system. I mean, I think I can step outside of, what I'm listening to you guys and say, like, okay, well, if I'm the teacher, I'm the science teacher, or I'm the English teacher, I'm going to be frustrated if the kid's throwing a chair. But then again, if I've got an IEP that I'm not following, I'm responsible. I'm a little bit responsible for that problem.
Right.
I should have asked for
Yeah,
help.
yeah.
I should have said, like, help me. What am I doing wrong?
Yeah. And what I will say is one of the reasons why I have so much empathy for those teachers is because I was that asshole.
Yeah.
I understand why they would want to get little versions of me out of the classroom. So I get that. And I've seen that. But again, like you said, the problem is we don't know if that's the right answer. And for a lot of them, it kind of starts, I think this idea of like a school to prison pipeline and stuff is often overblown, but it's not without its merits. And, that for initial process of marginalizing the needs of those kids and just saying it's just easier to discard them than it is to deal with them, I think often sets up the future. Just, okay, that's what's always going to be the thing that happens. And what ends up happening is it becomes the next building's problem until it becomes society's problem, right? So at the elementary level, they do all this, and then it just becomes a middle school's problem.
It starts in elementary.
It becomes the high school's problem. But the problem is, one of them is at the high school's level, it becomes society's problem. And that kid's probably going to end up in jail or hurt or worse, or just like, it doesn't have to be that dramatic. It could just be that they are only 4% of what they could have been if we had, done this stuff and followed the law and helped these kids.
Well, as someone who taught elementary school and who was certified to be specialized in, my master's was specialized in elementary education, this is an issue very near and dear to my heart, because I really believe that probably about 85 or 90% of the problems, whether it's behavioral or even learning disabilities that are not organic in origin, start in the K through 3. That's where it starts. And if we don't get a handle on teaching K through 3 properly, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. But that's where it lives, because if that kid is promoted past 3rd grade and they cannot read and they cannot do basic arithmetic, that is just going to get shoved along and shoved along and shoved along. And people rarely go back to the 1st grade teacher. They
Right.
rarely go to the first grade teacher and say, what the heck?
Hmm.
Right? What's going on? Or even the third grade teacher. But those middle school teachers, oh, they get hassled. The high school teachers are being asked, like, what are you doing? And it's like, you sent me a kid who can't read. You sent me a kid who's acting out because he's frustrated because he can't read. I mean, this has been a problem that started as like a little tiny snowball that you rolled down the hill in the middle of a blizzard.
Yeah.
And I just keep coming back to that. Those early grades make a huge difference. And if we're going to wait for these kids to fail, which is the policy, and then you just pass the buck, the criticism doesn't go to those sweet little elementary school teachers. They're not going down to the, second and third grade teachers and saying, what the hell are you doing?
Well,
At all.
let's talk about, where that criticism should go and maybe transition to like kind of where we are now and what's been going on. Is that cool? Are you
Yes.
cool?
Sure.
So I want to, on the onset, just seed a thought with people listening. And then this is going to be really important to come back to, but seed the thought that all of this is about these kids. Everything that, the programs that Steven developed, the complaints he's filed, the complaints that I filed, all of this is about helping these kids. And it's about fighting to make sure these kids get the help that they, again, not just that they need, but that they're legally required to get. Like, it shouldn't be like, we shouldn't have to legally mandate it, right, to do the right thing, but it is. And so it's like, whichever one you want to lean on, this is what should be done. And that is the impetus, that's the motivation for all of this on our end here. And it always has been. Okay. So I want to seed that thought because I want to come back to that whenever you kind of look at where we're at and how far removed we are from just children generally in this process now because of the actions of the school district and stuff. So one of the things you mentioned before was I read a letter and email the last time I was on. And what that was that, like I said, a former student had tried to kill himself, and then about a little under a month later, another one did succeed in doing that.
Yeah.
And I was like, to hell with this. These guys, you can find it. I think I published it. It's on like an open doc. It's on, maybe it might even be on my not WordPress, Medium. I don't remember. But it's out there. And then what I did was I found that these, I wrote this open letter to the community, basically saying, here's what went on at this middle school. We have this stuff that happened with these kids. This is the teacher that they were under. Complaints were filed. Here are the people who witnessed this, who also filed complaints. And the district didn't investigate any of it. They ignored it. Yeah. They failed these kids. And, this is what's happened. And I make it clear, I don't think this teacher who is the unhinged one, the one you're talking about, who like is just emotionally projecting stuff, she was just an emotional parasite in a lot of ways, these kids. Foil is a term used. I think that I like that better. But I said, I don't think this is her fault. A competent administration does not allow these people to be teachers in the first place. And whenever they're made aware of their presence, they just get rid of them. So actually, I think that the administration is to blame here. And I also say, I'm not saying that it's this teacher or even the school district's fault that this one kid is dead. But the problem is that we shouldn't have to ask the question, because the situation was, for people who don't remember or who didn't see that, the kid who did end up killing himself was wrongfully put into a completely self-secluded, isolated, the tier 1 most intensive behavior support program based on the decision of this crazy teacher. And whenever I went and collected the data, because she was saying, well, he's failing in all of his regular ed classes, I looked at it. He was doing great. He was continually improving in every single one of his regular ed classes over a 3-4 week time period. The only classes he wasn't doing well in were the 2 classes he had with her and one with another teacher who had only collected data 3 out of 16 possible times. So you can't even use that as a statistic. And when I brought it to her, I said, you can't pull him back. You're pulling him out of the classes he's doing well in into the ones where he's miserable. Because he would talk about how this teacher made him feel like crap, how he felt worthless, how nothing he did mattered, all this other stuff. This teacher had it out for him. I don't know why. I think maybe because he didn't buy into the emotional stuff. He didn't give her what she was looking for. But I said, this is a mistake. And I was told, it's above your pay grade. Stay out of it. He gets pulled back, suffers for almost the entirety of a school year, because it wasn't at the beginning of the year, but it was like maybe a month or 2 into school. He's miserable. And the point I made in the email and the point I made before is, I don't know if that is to blame or not. But the problem is we should not
Sure
have
didn't help.
right, and we shouldn't even have to ask the question,
No.
did the year of torture he suffered unjustly at the hands of an emotionally unstable teacher in a room he shouldn't have been in the first place, where he was put in there based on bad data, we shouldn't even have to ask if that was part of the math to begin with. It's
No.
like, oh, Susie
Just
committed
shouldn't have
suicide.
happened.
Do you think the fact that she was molested had anything to do with that? Well, maybe, I don't know, but that shouldn't even be part of the math, man. Like that shouldn't have happened in the first place. So I send this email out. I send it in an individualized copy to every member of the school board, asking them to read it and to consider it. Because at the end, I say, please just take this seriously. Do what these people failed to do. Investigate what happened. Don't let this happen again.
Right.
For our kids' sake, please don't let this happen again. You have to fix this problem, and it starts with the administration. I made it clear it wasn't about the teacher. Anyway, and then I found that those idiots had left my school email functioning. And so I logged on to my school email, and there was an option to send to the entire district. So I sent a copy of that email or a copy of that letter to literally every employee in the school district.
Good for you.
Yeah, because fuck them, right? I don't care. And they need to know. And that was a more robust email where I did include names, and I did include the policies that they violated. And I gave like a little preamble where I said, it's one thing to be mad. It's another thing to do something, or be sad. It's another thing to do something about it. And I even said, there's ways you can respond to this. You can blame others. You can blame yourself. You can do all these other things. And I said, maybe even just me writing this and saying this is part of me blaming myself for not doing everything I could to help this kid when he was in this classroom. I did everything that I knew of at the time. If I would known this was going to happen, maybe I would have made a bigger stink. I probably would have lost my job, but or lost my job earlier. And so, but I
Hindsight,
said,
yeah.
we have to do something about it. And so I send that email out, and 2 days later, they found it. It was up for a while, and then their tech department deleted it and got rid of my email. I didn't know if anything had come of that. I didn't know who saw it or what had happened.
Mm-hmm.
2 days later, I go to speak in front of our school board. I signed up to speak in front of the school board. And again, I think I might have mentioned this last time we talked. I don't know if I did or not, but I'll talk about it anyway, because the school board is going to be relevant, especially as we get towards the end of this. Where I say what they told me was, you have 2 minutes. There can be no personal attacks. Stick to your time, and no profanity. Those are the rules I was given.
Right.
So when it's time for me to speak, I sent an email out. I said after the tragic loss of I said after the tragic loss of a student, I sent this out, and one of them interrupted me. Oh, Madam President, would you please remind the speaker this is sensitive information, it's confidential. And it's like, people know that this kid died. Like, I didn't give a name, I didn't give any details. I said after this happened. So they take a bunch of my time, and I say, okay, after a tragedy occurred, I send an email out, or the president of the school board, she says, Mr. Speaker, please remember not to use personal details or confidential information, anything like that. I said, okay, whatever. After a tragedy occurred, and I think we all know what I'm talking about here, I sent an email out to each of you and others explaining the circumstances that I think at least could have contributed to this, and imploring you to investigate. And I'm only here just asking you to do this and to say, like, look, here's the names of the principal here. And I started naming the principal and the superintendent. I'm like, these people knew about it. They didn't investigate.
Right.
A different school board member interrupts, Madam President, can you please remind the speaker to keep personal and the president of the school board is like, this is the second time you've been told to keep names and details out. It's like,
they're public
first off,
servants.
I wasn't even told that the first time. Secondly, what are you talking about? How can I not name names? Like, that's not in the rules. Like, so it shows you where
ridiculous.
The allegiances are, right? It's just like, I can't even name the names of the people. So I finally just say, like, look, there are people, some of them may or may not be the superintendent, actually the superintendent emailed me before I spoke at this school board meeting, like maybe an hour before, saying I had violated FERPA and done all this other stuff, and basically threatening me to not talk, like with the email I sent, which there's no violations of FERPA in there. I checked, nothing in there. but trying to silence me before I spoke to the school board. So I say, look, someone who may or may not be the superintendent might have emailed me before this to threaten me to not talk. It's pretty obvious that this is a hostile crowd, but I don't think that's all of you. I'm just asking you to do this. So to investigate. And then that was it. That was it. But it was just obvious that that's where the allegiances were. So that was in November. That was at the very beginning of November. So I'm just going to lay out some details and then I'll kick it to Steven to fill certain things in, but just for the sake of time. So I send that email out. Don't know what happens. Talking for the school board, whatever. In the meantime, he's in the process of filing some complaints about his personnel file, had documents removed. And these documents were important because the last time around, which I talked about this in one of our conversations before, the last time around, whenever this stuff happened, where Steven was filing these complaints and filed stuff with the federal level, they went through all this stuff of constructive termination to try and get him to quit. They ended up doing bringing in an outside investigator, but then they made the parameters where the investigator could only look at these certain things, could only talk to these certain people, basically couldn't look at any of the substance of his complaints, couldn't talk to any of the people that would corroborate it, all this other stuff. So the documents that were removed from his personnel file were things that showed the pattern of what the school district had done before whenever this stuff was getting more and more escalated in terms of these complaints. And that was also the last time they tried to basically constructively terminate him. And they weren't able to. That superintendent ended up leaving. I believe they got a different special ed director sometime around there as well. So anyway, so he has those complaints going on. They're being ignored. And then after I send my email out, things get weird for him. The special ed director stops talking to him. He's not even getting anything from the superintendent about the personnel file or anything like that. And so then on December 2nd, he files a huge 33-page complaint where it was their failure to investigate all the stuff that happened in the middle school, failure to investigate the situation, the fact that they retaliated against him by suspending him, sending him out, ordering him not to talk to anyone, whereas the teacher he'd complained about and that I'd complained about and the other people had complained about was allowed to stay there and got this big, warm, cushy send-off. This is the mentally ill lady, by the way, the one who would scream and yell at kids and run out in the hall in tears and try to pull other people out in the hall and leave kids alone. She got the big, glowing send-off. He has to have his entire professional reputation ruined. So he files this big 33-page complaint on December 2nd. You failed to investigate all this stuff. And I'm calling you out for it. All this stuff from 2020. Here's everything that happened. So he sends that in. And then was it on the 9th? You stopped by the superintendent's office. Correct. And you guys had a 3-hour conversation. Yeah. It turned into this clear the air. So why don't you talk about that conversation and then the follow-up conversation you had on the 16th with the superintendent to kind of lay the groundwork of. So he has these long, friendly conversations. Then we'll get to where maybe some of this stuff starts to shift and it might not have been what it seemed. So talk about that.
Well, let me back up for one important date. 2012-13 is where I filed my first complaints with OCR that the district was failing to implement behavior plans.
Right.
I did all the research I could in terms of what happens to whistleblowers. And of course, whistleblowers, it might be overblown in terms of a small district, but I just looked up, what tends to happen to people to try to prepare myself, and the things that I found were no one's going to talk to you again. Constructive termination will start. The second you file that complaint, the school's attorney will order the district to start collecting data on you every day. Any point that they can bring up to use to discredit you, that's sort of the way this works when you file a complaint at this level. I read articles that whistleblowers never recover. Once you do that, once you make that claim and file that complaint, it becomes very difficult to ever do anything else again. I looked at my job at that point up to that, and a lot of what I was doing was not it wasn't helpful because I wasn't allowed to get in the trained teachers. And so I really thought that was my alternative to file this complaint. I looked at where I could file complaints. There were a number of places to file complaints. One was through IDEA at the state level, federal level.
Right.
IDEA has one complaint route, and they force you to list people who didn't run plans. So I would have had to have taken the laundry list of educators and the fact they weren't running plans and list them specifically. And my letter to OCR said very specifically, this is not an individual teaching issue. This is systemic. This is administration, school board, and policy, which is why it got so much attention from those people in terms of my constructive termination. I looked at OCR, and OCR has a route that's similar to IDA's, but at OCR, I can file a systemic complaint where I don't have to list any individual teachers, and I can say this is widespread and it is what I think that it is.
So you're trying to be nice.
I'm trying to be nice. It is, well,
Yeah.
it's inaccurate. It is an administrative issue, and I don't want to highlight teachers. There's no. I'm not sure they should get in trouble for this if they live in a system that is not developed and incompetent for the most part.
Right.
So I chose that route, followed those complaints, and so that was 2012-13. And then the retaliation ensued. Anything you can think about that was happening. Truman gave some examples earlier about being called into the office and asked everything you love to do, what do you hate to do? And then within weeks, almost word for word, got a list of job duties that was everything I said I hated to do. So that started. Sat in 2013 or 14, I sat in a meeting with one of our superintendents who was doing most of the aggressive retaliation and harassment with the school's attorney and then my attorney. And the attorney argued, it wasn't even a secret. She argued that there was nothing in our district policy that prevented this superintendent from investigating himself.
Right.
Just not that, there wasn't a workaround. It was no confusion. It was nothing in our policy prevents him from investigating himself. And he's welcome to investigate himself as much as we like. And so I started to be transferred around to schools, buildings, and similar behaviors and actions from the district ensued, constructive termination. And then I moved to the middle school after we got a new superintendent, then to start building this program. And then we sort of get up from there. We get up to the points of February 2020, when I filed my next set of complaints. It had been a decade since I'd filed any complaints. I filed those. They did not do their investigation. Their infractions are a laundry list of Title IX violations that are just very, very clearly stated in Title IX, whether you're looking at, more Obama era Title IX or Trump DeVos Title IX. But that got us up to that point where those in February 2020 complaints were filed. They did not investigate those complaints. I interacted with the school district on a number of occasions, letting them know these weren't done. I was ignored. So I kept on that until the next year, had some interactions with my attorney and their attorney, where I got a letter, I think, from their attorney that really seemed to indicate that they really didn't do the investigation. They weren't hiding that either, it seemed at that point.
Think about that. Just think about how they just feel like we can do whatever we want. Like Truman said at the beginning, like, we're going to get away with whatever we want. That's just so amazing to me.
Well, the axiom, you can't fight City Hall, and you can't fight and win. You can fight all you want, but it's hard to get a positive resolution, is one of the truest I know of, and how difficult this can be. And Truman was right earlier when he said, I really do think there's a act first, apologize later. I think there is an actual process that districts discuss when they've got legal people involved, which is until we have to show up to court, we really don't have to do anything. We can deny and do this, and it's probably not going to impact how court goes for us, in the future, which is just fascinating to me, because as Truman said, this is all about helping children. It is, we would never teach kids to try to get out of what they've done. Will they admit that they've, stolen a pencil, and then what's the consequence? But we don't teach kids that. But districts, I think, feel free and have a license to do that as much as they would like.
This also means that there are lawyers.
Absolutely.
We can't lose sight of that it's not even just the employees that are directly involved, but at every step of the way, there are district attorneys. Not district attorneys, but attorneys representing the district who are giving advice. I'm sure of it. There's no way they're acting just completely, they're maybe not every step, but at certain steps along the way, they're checking in with their counsel.
And that advice is perfectly rational for those attorneys, because the attorney isn't there to represent the kids.
Yeah.
They're there to help protect the district.
I think
so that's the advice they're
taxpayers,
going to get.
parents, etc. You need to hear this. You need to really digest this information, that you're not only paying the salaries of all these people, you're paying the legal bill of the lawyers who advise them on how to protect those salaries.
Yep. Yep.
So, I mean, I just have to inject that in there because I think it's important when people
Yeah.
are starting to think, I know that Steven's going to have some legal bills
Oh, yeah.
and people need to understand that there's nobody coming to his rescue.
Yep.
And his rescue is the kid's interest too.
Yeah.
He's the
I mean,
one
yeah,
person
yeah.
here, along with Truman, who've been saying, we're trying to represent the kids. He could have quit. He could have walked off. He could have switched districts. He could have gone off and just done private practice stuff, right? But to continue to hammer away at this is saying, I'm not willing to give up on these kids and holding these people accountable. And they got all kinds of protection paid for again by the taxpayers. I had to put that in there.
Well, you know, that's an interesting point. I mean, I used to be a member of our union. You know, the dues aren't inexpensive. And one of the things that I think that I found out that Truman found out as well was, you know, in Wyoming, if I use the educational union's attorney, you know, he's never quite my attorney either. He still works
Right.
for the educational union. And at some point, what they're willing to do is write letters for you.
Yep.
You have to write your own letters. They kind of correct them, and that it's just a letter writing campaign.
Yep.
And I'm guessing there aren't any school-based attorneys in our state that quake when our educational union attorney walks in, because they know that they're never going to take us to court. You know, I'm going to get lots of letters. That's what'll happen. I have a letter from the presidents of the Wyoming Education Association, and I'll say Wyoming because I think this is very important. I have an email when I was arguing about this legal support and needing to push this forward. Okay, push this forward. And I've got an email from him, president, vice president. And he says, we, the WEA, would rather defend teachers who touch children than take your case currently.
Let that sink in.
They would rather defend teachers who touch children than to take up my case or a case similar to Truman's to go after the district for retaliation and not running plans and to help out. That was what, and we were talking about money and finances, and he was saying, we're saving our money for those situations, not for you. And so, you know, that was my last place to get an attorney that I didn't have to fork over, you know, $300 an hour for. And just an amazing statement that I wasn't going to get support from the district. The union that I'm paying dues for, which I canceled immediately after that interaction. I haven't joined since. But it does take some time in terms of who's supporting you. In many replies to our district, I have said many times to our board, I said, please remember, the attorney works at your leisure, not the other way around. There's nothing in our policy that says the board can violate policy and let their attorney run away with this. I think the board still has to keep that attorney in check. And I think once it gets to the legal level, they never interact with that. You know, they don't consider that again, you know, ever.
Now, is it because I'm hypothesizing that one of the reasons they rather defend people like that is people like that are going to be beholden much more so than the person demonstrating obvious sets of principles and integrity who is demonstrating I'm beholden to no one but my own conscience.
Right. I think that's true. You know, some of the reasons I've been given by the Education Association here, some of those reasons are just, you know, they weigh the case and are we going to win or not? You know, and so
they're going to win a case with somebody who touches children.
There you go. It was just a matter of, you know, if we lose, it sets a bad precedence and such. But yeah, there could be, there could be a number of reasons, but I would suspect if I can continue to show the only thing the union wanted to know from me was, are you getting a paycheck? If you're still being paid, we're really not going to defend you. They can treat you as horribly as they want to. They can put you in a room where you don't work for years. But as long as you're getting a paycheck, we don't really want much to do with what's going on with you.
And even if you lose your paycheck, like I did, they still won't do much. You know, they'll say, well, how much were you really making? And, you know, how much would we recoup? And, you know, here's some loopholes and we don't feel like doing it. So,
but in the timeline that we were broaching earlier, you know, I filed those initial complaints around 2012-13, filed complaints against a coworker for sexual harassment, gender discrimination on 220, roughly right in there. No investigation was done. They spent no expense and urgency to investigate me. They did not investigate her. They held interviews with staff about her and refused to ask questions about my case.
That was the one that I mentioned to you before, where
Right.
I recorded the conversation. So this guy was the Title IX director. He says he's brought in to get an extra set of eyes, you know, because of his expertise in bullying and harassment.
Right.
And I record the conversation, and he hadn't seen my complaints, hadn't seen them at all, wasn't interested in them, and was only asking questions about this teacher's complaints against him. And then, you know, I have that conversation recorded. That's our HR director now.
Correct.
That guy.
And so that's an important connection here as we, you know, 2 years later, I'm still trying to get them to talk about whether they did a complaint. They won't reply. So I finally decide just to file this complaint early December 2021. As Truman said, it was about a 34-page complaint, I think fairly well supported for someone who's not an attorney. So after filing, you know, I had to file that complaint and send it to the school board and everybody else to get them to talk to me. They would not talk to me about this until you know, there was no chance to even work it out with them. Not that they probably would have worked it out, but I had to file the complaint to get their attention. So I filed the complaint. I'm invited in for 3 conversations kind of across December 21 and January 22. I'm kind of up to date now. And, you know, the conversations are always, you know, collegial, and they're kind of, you know, they appear to be these friendly conversations.
Conversation with the superintendent.
So I'm called into the superintendent's office. I think the first time, I dropped by to talk to him, and the next 2, these were arranged meetings. So we have a meeting sort of broaching the complaint and then how to handle the complaint, and not a tremendous amount of detail in that very first meeting. But some ideas were floated. Some of the important ideas from that first meeting and then the second were the superintendent, I think, in speaking for the district, began to give me lots of options. He said, you know, I'm not sure if I can go back and investigate this now. And, you know, maybe the best thing for you to do is to let me know who you want to investigate the complaint, all of which sounded good for an initial conversation. Sure. I would be suspect of anybody in our district doing this. I'm suspect of outside evaluators doing this for good reason too. But at least there were some options. And I left that first meeting kind of thinking about those options. And then, so then we have the next meeting about a week and a half later to sort of solidify those options. And the same options were there. It was, and this has been a tactic, I think, in the past as administrators interact with my reports and write summaries and such, where the next meeting, the superintendent had kind of chosen a few points that he would always say, these seem to be the most important things in your complaint. And my response would be, well, those are 3 of the 23 things I listed, and I'm not sure they are the most important.
Right.
And almost every time what was chosen seemed to be beneficial for the district and perhaps his legal hindsight. In other words, it really wasn't the gravamen of my complaint, as he stated in his responses. But in that second meeting, we agreed that I would think about it over the holiday break, and that I could choose who was going to investigate this. He admitted that he probably could not investigate this, but tried to make an argument that he could do some of the investigations based on the points, and, you know, or that he could have the same superintendent who failed to do the investigation 2 years before.
HR guy.
The HR guy, correct?
Mm-hmm.
He could do the investigation currently. And so right off the bat, I have to go back to 2002 to say, well, wait a minute, you know, first of all, superintendent. Yeah. What was that? 2020. So first of all, you're listed in the complaint. I've complained about you for failing to do this investigation, purposely so. I've complained about you for retaliation. I've complained about the HR person for conducting a highly biased and discriminatory investigation. Complained about you guys and the district. And I said, you know, you can't have anything to do with this complaint. You cannot investigate any aspect. There's not a place where you can kind of sneak in to do this. And neither can the HR person. You were both identified prior. There were 2 other minor complaints filed before that they failed to investigate. So we have 3 complaints that they failed to investigate leading up to my large complaint
Mhm.
that was filed in December. So at that point, I was still given the choice. Let me know who you want to come investigate this. Let's talk about who's going to do it.
Right.
Can I
Please go ahead. Yes.
So there was a few other really interesting things that came out of that conversation, or the 2 ones that happened in December. The superintendent said things like, there's some things from that time that I'm not proud of. Again, he acknowledged that the investigation probably wasn't done. He acknowledged that the HR director was supposed to make, schedule. He wasn't director at the time. He was the Title IX guy, the guy who's I had the conversation recorded with. That potato, we'll call him Brian because he's reminds me of Brian Stelter.
Right. Yeah.
So
The
that
potato.
the Brian who did
Isn't that sad? I hear the word potato
right,
and I think of him.
yeah. So anyway, I haven't been able to eat French fries for years. So Brian failed to investigate that stuff. The superintendent says, makes an offer to Stephen to say, well, we could, he was supposed to schedule interviews with you, but because of COVID, which was not true. He blamed a lot of it on COVID, but acknowledges they didn't conduct the investigation. He offers to have Brian go back and reinvestigate this stuff. Okay. And Stephen says, I don't think he can do that, which is one of the things, he just articulated. And that's important. We'll get to, some irony. It's an interesting thing there here in a minute.
How long, just like we've covered so much stuff, give me a time frame of how long from the beginning of when you filed your complaint, Stephen, to then where are we now? Are we months? Are we how long?
Which complaint? Which one?
Well, the 30-page complaint.
That's December 3rd.
Okay, this past December.
2/21.
Yes, yes. That's okay. That's the big complaint. That's saying you didn't investigate these other things that I filed.
And those complaints cover a period going back how far?
To 2020.
To 2020. It's over a year. Okay.
Yeah,
the reason I wanted to do that, the reason I just, again, for the audience and for myself, is this is where my mind is always with these children. Yep. So remember, he's filed a complaint in December about things that he'd observed and were going on, and he, documented all the stuff, and obviously had been trying to address and fix and deal with people, finally saying, I've got to file a complaint because this isn't going anywhere. And in the meantime, children in classrooms, languishing, not having their plans followed, having emotional abuse by a mentally ill person who is not treating them right. And I kind of want that to reside in your headspace a little bit, because it's easy to get caught up in the details of, and they said this and they did that, and as we're now farther down the path. But I just want us to have a space back here for those kids.
That's why I said at the beginning, seed the thought, this is all about these kids.
That's right.
After we get done explaining everything that's gone on so far, you'll go, wait, there was no mention of kids anywhere in this. And
Thank you.
Because that's how far removed these people are from the interest of these children. It's all
exactly. And I just kind of wanted to bring us back there again and get the time frame, because a whole lot happens in a child's development in the span of a year.
Yep.
And in the middle grades, especially if they're struggling with behavioral issues on top of COVID, on top of everything else. And it, to me, as a mom, as a former teacher, as a person who covers this stuff, this is giving me, I'm getting upset. I've been upset through the other videos that we've done about this, but as I'm listening, and then they said this, and then he said, I made mistakes and I did that. All I'm picturing are kids like that one that you said who killed himself, or herself. We don't know. But I mean, who committed suicide. And as you said, we don't know for certain, but I gotta believe it didn't help.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not on their minds at all. Right. In fact, they probably block it out on purpose, because there's a part of them, they're human, but they've probably got a lot of calluses on their conscience. And they probably don't think about it on purpose. Because all they're thinking about, again, it's that multi-tier check. It's always self-preservation first.
I can't see. I'm more in the Stephen camp. It would be literally impossible for me to function like they function. Yeah. I would be lighting my hair on fire. This is, which is what you were basically doing. Right. But that must have been so painful for you. So not just as a professional, but even as a person, when you're obviously, you're a counselor, what's going on psychologically with these kids, the risk that they're at every single day, this gets ignored. I can't even imagine.
Right. Yeah. And I think as both of you guys have spoken about that's one of the issues. I mean, as the kid issue underneath all of this is how you feel every night, when you go to bed, and how you feel about going to work in the morning in terms of not being able to help. I was suspended for nearly 3 months. And I was told I could not speak with anybody. No one could speak with me. And we get back into some of these title issues where I wasn't allowed to collect information to defend myself. And so it was very difficult during that time. I had services I provided to kids every single day, and no one filled those service gaps. It's not like another school site came over to do that. Those kids just didn't get those things for the rest of the year, because it was so important for them to keep me at home during their investigations and such.
And this was during COVID.
Right.
And I remember having meetings with people. I told you there was a school psych also who was pretty competent and supported what was going on. There was a teacher who was really good at her job who just turned out to be kind of a coward. But we'd have these meetings, and they're talking about doing these at-home visits. And I remember calling this other school psych. We'll talk more about this person later. But calling and saying, like, why isn't Steven part of this? This is what he does. If
Right.
we just spend an hour and a half talking about how understaffed we are in terms of going to check on these kids, one of our best assets is currently on the bench. Why? And this person's like, yeah, it's really frustrating. I've been trying to get guidance from administration, and I'm not getting anything.
Can't
back.
have that really competent person who asks too many questions and holds us accountable. No, we can't have him involved in the process.
Again, to your point about how this isn't on their minds, it's like he literally sat at home with nothing to do during this entire time when they're scrambling.
We have such a shortage, Truman.
Yeah.
What are we going to do?
Yeah. And just did, because they were that interested in their self-preservation, that it wasn't like, well, maybe he could at least be out doing some home visits with these kids that he met with
Remember
regularly.
this, folks. Next time you hear people complaining about teacher shortages, about wonder in your mind, who's on the bench?
Yeah.
Who's been sidelined? Who's been fired? Who's been transferred? Who's been shoved to the side because they're poking around where their nose shouldn't be? Think of people like Steven. Think of, our friend at Chalkboard Heresy, right? Frank. Think of Ramona. Think of all the teachers that I've profiled this year, or actually, last year plus. It's a trend, isn't it? It's an interesting one. Yeah.
They force the people who are going to cause problems out, and those problems being like, hey, maybe we should, actually be doing our jobs and helping these kids.
Yes.
Anyway, but another thing that the superintendent said during those conversations, he accused Steven of blowing up on people, and how he has a habit of blowing up on people. And whenever Steven pressed him on that, he said, "Can you think of one example where I've done that besides this conflict I had with this teacher? Where Steven literally yelled at her, 'Do your damn job,' after this, she was yelling at him."
Sounds like she deserved it.
Yeah. I mean, it was a total, there was a symmetry there in terms of tensions. But anyway, he said, "Can you think of one instance besides that?" The superintendent said, "Yeah, actually I can't." And so it was a really revealing conversation in terms of where he's coming from, what his paradigms are. And like Steven mentioned, he's giving him these choices of he's acknowledging an investigation didn't take place. Maybe you can have some choices here. Okay. And, and then I think you said you were going to think about it over break. Yeah. And so then you come back, and is there anything else from that meeting?
Well, yeah, another little point, one of the contentious points in all of this are my fidelity checks, going in to see whether people are doing, their job, and only using that for the most part to try to help teachers get better and have a baseline so we can reach a goal. That came up, and the superintendent several times has said, well, you need to find a different way to do that, and put some more honey on it. I'm like, well, I'm not sure how you sugarcoat watching a plan that is or not being done and giving the information back. But and I was pushed. I said to him, how would you do it differently, please? I said, first of all, are you telling me to stop doing fidelity checks? He said, no, keep doing them. Right. So he tells me to do them, but he's not going to give me the support for doing them when a principal gets mad or a building gets mad. But he didn't have any feedback on that. And I think that's very important. And they've given me this role, which has an administrative undertone to it, to collect this information and give it back to people. But the administrators I need who have the authority won't lend that to me then to get this job done. When people
Right.
complain, the administration reacts not by supporting me and saying, yes, this is what Mr. Walters does. I just get moved to the next school and the next school. But that was the only other thing in that I thought was important is they will admit that I'm under a directive to do these fill-rate checks. I would do them whether I was under the directive, but have no feedback on how to make that better, and what they are not understanding or understanding and refusing.
Be nicer as you tell people they're not doing their jobs. Like, I don't even understand how that works.
Well, and what they're refusing to do is understand the reason why I can't do this is because I don't have your administrative support. You're the superintendent. If you let the principal know this is what I do and to expect this, that I'm likely not to be run out of the building, but because that message is not conveyed to buildings and I don't have the support. As you said, I become one of the lone people in there giving this feedback. And then I'm the irritant and it's easy for me to be let go.
A minor anecdote on that, just before we get to when things shift in January, because we still haven't even gotten to like the really intense stuff, to be honest, in terms of where we are today. When I first started working in the middle school, there was a science teacher I was friends with, and he knew I was working in the behavior support. And he said, "Do you work with that Steven guy?" I go, "Yeah." And he's like, "What do you think about him?" I go, "I don't really interact with him much, but he seems like a fine guy. Like, I don't know why." He goes, "Everyone hates that guy. And I don't know why. I don't know why they hate him. But I mean, everyone seems to hate him and I don't get it. And I didn't know if you had any insight." I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Yeah, I don't know. I could just tell there's a lot of people that don't like him." So that was even there. I was given that without any reason. My science teacher buddy had that impression. And it was just because like he's the irritant. He gets sent in with an impossible task. Go and whip these people into shape and make sure they're doing this stuff. But also, we're not going to help you. And when you piss all these people off, we're going to side with the people you pissed off, even though we're the ones that sent you in there with this task in the first place. So just an anecdote. So you have he leaves it where you have the choice, and then you come in December 5th and have a conversation with him.
I'm supposed to think about it and come
to January 5th. January 5th.
I want to just a quick statement on the first two meetings. So every time we have one of these meetings, I'll get a memo summary about the meeting, and I've learned that I'm going to have to reply to the meeting. And the summaries are very different than the conversations. The conversations can seem collegial, everybody's, and there can be some frustrating points, but the what's listed in the summary is very much biased towards the school district. So what gets listed in the summary is everything that supports what the district is doing, and any comments that I've ever made about the district and things are left out of the summaries. And it's just an amazing thing to go back through those and have to reply to those summaries and say, well, yes, we did talk about that, but these are the 10 other bullets we talked about under that, and these are the big issues. And that has been a very common thing with meetings with administrators in their summaries, is they're highly biased, which is part of my argument. This is a biased, discriminatory system, and no matter where I interject myself to talk, I get these, the bias shows up in some form or another. That is either for self-preservation for the person, and or self-preservation for the district as an administrator. Keeping in mind that these are one-year employees, they don't have a union, they can be fired for cause. It's a little more difficult to fire me, but probably too much more difficult. But at every step of the way, there's something that's just not right that has to be corrected. Right. And in correcting these things, I bet this school year alone, I've got 200 pages of replies to the district that have to be documented with emails and logic and going back through their stuff to document my stuff and why this did or didn't happen, and how much time it takes just to keep this up so you never miss a beat.
Right.
But that gets us to after Christmas. I'm supposed to think about who I want to do this evaluation. I have the meeting with our superintendent, and I'm thinking we're going to talk about who's going to do it. And so instead of having this conversation, he says, no, that's not what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you the way it's going to go for the most part. I'm going to do the investigation. I reiterate my arguments that we had prior in terms of him being part of the complaint, as was the HR director then and now in 221 and 22. And we sort of went back through that whole process. But at that point, he'd made up his mind. The district had, I think the school board, or maybe the attorney, I'm sure he's probably conversing with the attorney at this time. So all my choices are taken away. He's going to do the evaluation. If he decides to let the HR person interview, he might. One of the things I argue is that he's going to do this evaluation of my complaints simply based on looking at documents. And that has been a tactic, I think, that they've used in the past. He was going to review the documents from 220 that administrators wrote about that process that I had later accused of not doing the investigation into my complaints. And I argued, my point was, well, you need to go back and do all the interviews if you're going to do this. And I'm still arguing you can't do it. But if for some reason, you're going to, you can't do this by looking at the administration documents that were written by the administrators I've accused as well. In other words, this should be out of your wheelhouse completely. And that was it. There was, he'd made up his mind. I wrote a complaint then at that point to the school district to say, your superintendent cannot investigate himself in this matter. Made my argument. In the meantime, the superintendent is a member of our school board, right? He's an executive member of the board according to our policy. And so he gets to go argue his point in person with people he works with. And I'm stuck trying to argue this point via email, sending it to the school board president. So there's not really equal access to try to argue this point. So about a week later, 2 weeks later, I get a reply that says from the school board saying, we agree with the superintendent. He can investigate this, indicating that he can investigate himself. So that brings us up to my last interaction concerning my complaints for their failure to investigate, which had some other complaint components in it. And so then I got his, investigative report, right? And that's sort of where we're at now in terms of, how he went about this process to decide whether my case had actually been investigated in 2020.
So what we have is the superintendent in conversations with him. And then even like their lawyers kind of inferring before that, earlier in the year that that the investigation did not happen, was not completed. Didn't occur. So then it's like, well, if he's going to go back and look at the outcome of that investigation, what's he going to use? What documents is he using? What interviews is he using if it didn't happen?
Right.
So he sends this document to Stephen that's the response to his 33-page complaint. This contains statements like, it was unfortunate that the complaints could not have been resolved using the processes at the middle school. The director was unable to finish this investigation due to COVID-19 and the shutdown of learning. Like so on and so forth.
Finish?
Yeah, he was unable to finish the investigation.
Implying it was started.
It implies one was started, but either way, it's saying it wasn't finished. There's another one where he says where that they did not. Oh yeah, the process was not completed because the environment where he worked no longer existed. So in his response to whether or not they investigated, he acknowledges multiple times that they didn't investigate, that the process didn't happen, that there was no follow-up interview from the Title IX guy scheduled with Stephen, and so on and so forth. But then he concludes that they did investigate and that it was sufficient and that it was handled just fine. So even in their
we didn't finish, but was finished enough.
Yeah. And here's what's fascinating. So remember how earlier mentioned that one of the options he gave Stephen in December, so a few months ago, was to have the Title IX guy, now the HR guy, go back and investigate. And Stephen said he wasn't sure if that was possible.
Right.
In this response to Stephen, the superintendent, while talking about the events of 2020, while talking about those events, the stuff that happened in February, that Stephen's saying you didn't investigate, the superintendent literally says, I offered to have this guy go and talk to you and you refused. So he takes a conversation that took place in December 2021, and applies it to 2020 to use that as an excuse for why do you see the bait and switch? Like, do you see the,
my God.
I could find the exact quote. It's pretty astounding.
So he's just literally blaming you.
Well, and one of the, you know, in a general sense, some of the comments he makes is, after reviewing all these documents from 220,
Yeah.
I'm concluding that it would not have mattered if we'd investigated, because I don't think there was enough here to find in your favor. In other words, he retroactively tries then to say it wouldn't have mattered. We didn't really have to do the investigation,
Right.
because, you know, I don't think there was enough there to investigate. And this is information that, at least as far as I'm concerned, under title, I have a right to see. I have a right to see all the
Sure.
evidence. I filed a FOIA request for all those documents and was turned down at every corner. They won't send me the information, so I can mount a defense of myself. And so those are some things we're still working on. But did you find that, Ed?
I haven't found it yet, but one of the things that he also says here is that one of the things you said is that they did investigate. So the superintendent says that there were hundreds of pages of documents that were compiled during this investigation that I guess also didn't take place, and that's what he reviewed to reach these conclusions. But again, he says they didn't do this. They didn't have the right interviews with him. You see what I mean? And so this is just this brazen dishonesty that they have here.
Right.
Man, I can't find the part where he says that he offered to have him do that.
So where are we now? Where are we now?
So here's where we're at now. God, I want to find that thing really bad. I'll find it eventually. So this was sent on January 20th. All right. So you would think it'd be bad enough that the school board and the superintendent they find, yeah, he can investigate himself. He can investigate whether or not complaints against himself are valid. This is so morally bankrupt and ass backwards that you could just stop it right there. That in their own assessment of responding to his complaint that an investigation didn't take place, they even admit that it didn't take place multiple times, right, but that it doesn't matter, but that they still had enough to make the conclusions. I mean, this is really brazen stuff, right? On the same day that he gets this thing here from the 20th, on the 20th, the special ed director got a notification about an email notifying him that a complaint was filed against Stephen. Now, he didn't get the actual email. Stephen didn't get the notification until like the 24th or something like that. But the special ed director got it on the 20th, which is the same day that Stephen got this document. It's weird how these things kind of happen at the same time. We both get transferred on the same day. Anyway, weird stuff, right? The complaint. Well, why don't you talk about the person who filed the complaint and the relationship and just why this is so amazing?
Well, you know, people can make all sorts of arguments when you're complaining, and they can respond. And this is my opinion as such. So the complaint from this particular coworker was astounding, because this is a person who, as far as I have friends at work, she was a person who was a friend at work, and a friend because she supported me professionally and ideologically. We had the same views on just about everything. We worked together time and time again on campus and off campus to file complaints, to talk to board members. We did much of the stuff that you've heard was happening in terms of fidelity checks, complaining about principals, and such, together. I mean, it was something that she would initiate and I would help her on, and then I would initiate, she would help me on. So she was someone who, it was very, very surprising to me that I'm reading this letter now that suddenly she has complained about me. Now, she's also the one of the people that was at the high school that had the program that Truman sent his letter to. And which was very interesting in terms of these timeframes, because, you know, Ed sends his letter. Evidently, she's very insulted and is angry because she assumes that I wrote the letter. She assumes I wrote it for Ed and gave it to him to send in. So at least without any additional information, and as we go from Truman's letter up to the 20th, where I get this letter and she files her complaint, it looks like then she is angry and frustrated, and is now going to file a complaint against me because, and she lists in her complaint, for the most part, that it's sort of in reference to this letter.
I'll also
please,
add, this person was one where whenever Stephen gets suspended at the middle school, she was my go-to to go and talk about what was going on. She was the one who had my back with the union stuff. She hated that. She was the one who told me that she was leaving because of the principal at the middle school to go to the high school. Whenever I got transferred initially to the high school, I spent every day that I was in there for the short period of time, 5 days I was there, in her office multiple times talking to her. She was the one who pointed out to me this is now fall 2020, that what they were doing to us was retaliation, and directed me to the union rep to go and talk to, who was like all about it. Like this is stuff that she acknowledged, and she had advised that crazy teacher to leave, and said, hey, maybe this isn't the right job for you. So she knew all of this stuff. Okay. But then I send that email and I list her name in it, but it wasn't anything negative. I was actually giving her compliments, saying like she knew what was going on. She supported this. These are like, I say a direct quote from her that she told me about the principal, where whenever the stuff happened between him and that teacher, where the principal complained to her about the optics of it. And I'm like, she knew what was going on here. Like these are people, it was nothing at all. Like, and there was another teacher there too, who I mentioned her name. I said, these are people who were part of the complaint process, who they didn't have their voice heard either.
Right.
And she read my email and thought that he was behind it or something, and was blaming me, or something like that, it seemed like. And so she files a complaint against Stephen. That is it's like a bullying, harassment, something. So on February 7th, keep that date in mind. He'll explain why that's relevant. On February 7th, he gets a basically a notice of what's in the complaint. All right.
Right.
So again, this is a person who had been like on our side, like who understood, who was competent. In fact, wasn't she the main person who convinced you to come to the middle school?
She was. She
from the elementary you're at.
She talked to our superintendent, and so I took over more of the behavior role. She became more of the traditional school psychologist. She was the person who recommended that the teacher I file complaints about resign because she wasn't good at her job. She was the person that we spoke with about filing complaints about that person, and agreed and suggested we take those complaints to the principal. She was a person that I had met with previously with school board members to talk about that principal, but also look at sort of reunionizing, trying to get out of the WEA and getting into maybe an organization who would fight for us more.
Right.
So in short, we agreed and we helped each other. She spoke truth to power, had no issue with doing that. So to get this complaint against me from her was astounding. It was one of those things where I saw it and I just sort of kept waiting to wake up. Like, this is not a real thing.
Do you feel like somebody got to her, or they threatened her?
Yeah, I think we're getting to that. So absolutely. Go ahead.
So she gets this. So he gets this thing on February 7th. It's like a summary of, or, notice about it. And there's like 5 points in it. One of them is that he had harassed and bullied and tried to intimidate her into joining complaints with him against the school. She includes saying, including the school year where stuff happened at the middle school. So she's saying her grievance with him goes all the way back to like 2018, 2019, 2020, when, like I just told you, in fall 2020, she's telling me, it sounds like they're retaliating against you guys. Like, here's who you need to talk to. Here's the stuff that's going on. So everything cordial, everything good, right?
So she just totally.
I can give you my hypothesis about it, but we can get to that in a minute. But because she was also one, so her and the other teacher who I really respected, who was good at her job, really good at her job, they didn't answer my union attorney's phone calls whenever they had told me they would talk to him. They told me personally, yes, I will talk to him. I will verify these things. If they ask me these questions, I'll answer them honestly. At one point, my union attorney had tried to call or email her, didn't get a response. he calls me and says, I'm not hearing anything. And she was running for office at the time. And she said, well, I have like not, and I call her. I'm like, hey, he said he didn't get your email. She goes, I have like 8 emails going on right now with the campaign. Give him this one. It'll make sure that I get it so we can set something up for a time to talk. This is in like the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, right? So it is such a weird pivot. But anyway, well, like I said, I can hypothesize about that. So
Have you guys talked to her? Somebody's asking, have you talked to her specifically?
No, I haven't talked to her in
yeah.
over in a year.
Yeah. I haven't spoken to her in about 2 years. So that's why this is just a bit odd that she was fully in support of everything we're doing, not just in support of us going to her, but her coming to us to try to help us file these charges, and be part of this. Her basic complaint then was, I was bullying and harassing her because I was trying to collect the data I needed to prove my case that kids were being harmed at the middle school, to prove my case under Title IX, to prove my case under a mandatory reporter. That is the gist of just about everything she's saying, is that later on, and she didn't bother her at the time, but that's her argument today, is that in my current role as a mandatory reporter, collecting the information I needed to support my case against the district was harassment. And this is from now a person who never once ever in an email said she didn't want to do this. It was just the opposite. She always wanted to help do it.
So there's literally, there's no paper trail of going, leave me alone. Why are you bothering me? I don't want to help you. Not a single one.
Matter of fact, she sent two emails to prove her point, where I say to her, I understand that there are complaints going on. If it makes you feel uncomfortable to talk to me, please just let me know. She sent that as proof I was bullying her. That's how out of touch this is. Yeah. And I never got a response.
That's all she had.
Well, and that's,
she had nothing else, it sounds like.
What's fascinating there is that that's even something, Stephen had to find that, because in the February 7th document that they sent, she just gives dates of when emails were sent. And so he's like, okay, the only
emails themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's either no email was sent on that day, or these were the emails that were sent on that day. And it's a cordial interaction. So they send him this thing on February 7th. And it's like, here are the dates that would corroborate this. And he searches in his email, and this is what comes up is those types of things. And so it's like, what are you even talking about? On top of that, she says that he used her name without her permission to support the credibility of his arguments and stuff. And it's like, what does that even have to do with any of this? Like, again, where did she ever say, please stop using my name, I don't want to be part of this? Did that ever?
So what's your hypothesis as to what happened?
Let me finish her 5 points, and I'll give you.
Okay. Sorry. I'm like, the intrigue has caught me up, I guess.
So she also claims in this February 7th document that he helped me write that email, right? The one that I sent out to the district. Again, there's a part of me that is a little insulted that she would think that. It's like, she worked with me for long enough. You would think she'd be like, Truman's probably the type of person who can do that on his own and doesn't need, like, I'm pretty much, I don't really care. If I think it's right, I'll do it, kind of thing. And so the fact that she thought I needed someone's help or encouragement to do that is, of course, ludicrous. And he didn't help me with that. Nothing like that happened, but she's just saying it. And then the last point she says is that he was asking for information about students that he had no legitimate educational interest in. Well, it's like we said at the beginning, he's the behavior guy for the district. He has protected speech. If he thinks these plans aren't being run, he can do that. He can ask about that. And also, if he's trying to collect information about a case where plans aren't being run and these kids are being hurt, he can ask for that also. And she never said at any point in time, at least not that I know of, I haven't seen this stuff, but she never says, like, stop doing this. Like, stop, like, please don't give me this, or you don't have a right to that information or anything like that.
It's kind of hard to allege harassment if you never actually let the person know that they should stop communicating with you.
Right. The last thing, well, I'll get to the really, really fascinating part about this here in a minute, but you asked for my theory about why she's doing this.
Sure. Yeah.
Like I said earlier, the little compromises, I think, leads to big compromises. I think whenever she refused to answer phone calls from my lawyer, refused to help Stephen because she didn't want to be part of it, You know, whenever you are in a system, and it is made obvious that it is unpopular to oppose that system, the incentives are now for you to either support that system or at least stay out of, not be part of anything that opposes it.
You would like to
Right.
think so.
And so I think she adhered to the incentives in front of her. She's like, I don't want to make enemies. This is a messy thing. You know, it's unfortunate that what happened here. Again, she was when he said this sounds like retaliation. This is brazenly illegal. Like,
Right.
it's unfortunate, but I don't want to get my hands dirty. You know, I want to run for office again. I think she runs for like a house or, you know, like a state rep or something like that. And so I think that that's part of it. I think that she saw the email that I sent, and I think it pissed her off. I think it embarrassed her for the same reason why. So remember, whenever Stephen laid out, it's all fine until we have this IEP meeting and we have to talk about the plans aren't being run.
Right.
And then it just comes to people's minds of who's responsible for the plans not being run. Why is this happening? Like,
Right.
why aren't these people doing something about it? I think the email embarrassed her. I think it made her look bad, even
Yeah.
though that wasn't my intent at all
Sure.
in writing it.
100%.
But at the same time, I knew that it would probably piss her off when I wrote that email. You know, I get that. But, you know, my thought was, this is the price of cowardice. Like,
For sure.
you know, if you don't want to be part of this, I'm going to at least tell people that you know what happened so that people know that you knew.
Yeah.
And the same way with the teacher who's good and competent, but just a coward. After I sent that email, she blocked and deleted me on Facebook, blocked and deleted my wife on Facebook. Her husband did the same thing to both of us. You know, deleted me on Twitter. You know, I think she was embarrassed. I think because of what I was basically saying is this was fucked up. I've been trying to raise awareness for it. Steven's been trying to raise awareness for it. Here's some people who also knew what was going on, who were kind of with us for a time, and then they stopped. And that's embarrassing. And I also brought up about the high school, which is programs they were part of. You know, the kid who died, I'm pretty sure that this other teacher was his like TOR. So it's like, yeah.
I wonder if they were covering their bases because they were afraid there might be like a lawsuit someday from the family or
I don't
something.
know. I honestly think it was something where, you know, they started telling themselves the little lies of, you know, I think I mentioned this before, but that teacher who's a good teacher, the good one.
Yeah.
I told her at one point at the end of all that ordeal at the middle school, I said, you need to, because she was like, this is stresses me out. I hate this. You know, this was like her first year teaching. So she has all this stuff happen and COVID. I mean, I get it. Like, that's hard.
Right.
I said, well, you need to decide what kind of teacher you want to be. Because
I remember you said this. Yeah.
So if you don't do this on purpose, you will become one of these things on accident. It'll just happen naturally. Right. And it was just various degrees of involvement. Either you're going to stay out of it and say, I don't care, plug my nose, I hold my ears, you know, whatever, you know, or I will acknowledge the system screwed up, but I'll fight the battle in my classroom and not do anything outside of that. Or I will understand that I'm going to be unpopular, but I'm going to fight for all these kids and fight against the whole thing and know that probably just fighting in my classroom is probably not enough. So we need to decide which one. I think she started telling herself what she needed to tell herself to become the teacher who was like, I'll do what I can do in my own little sphere, whatever. Right. And I think that psych who had previously supported us probably did the same thing. And whenever it got exposed, you know, I think it was just a visceral reaction to truth. I think she was mad. I think she wanted to blame him. Again, it's so completely ridiculous for her to think that he was part of that or wrote any of it or anything like that because she knows me. I think it was a visceral reaction to having, you know, I would like to believe, you know, that there's a charitable thought that I think that any good person should at least have, even if it's buried deep down, have some kind of guilt for whenever they do these things. Like they know it's wrong and then they tell themselves the lies, but I think they know it's wrong. And whenever the truth is exposed, I think that guilt comes to the surface. It's like ripping a scab or opening an old wound. And so I think it was a backlash of that guilt and that anger of like, how dare they? And by the way, you know, one thing I didn't mention the last time I talked, but there was a part of me that was like, you know, they could say, how dare me, how dare Truman to write email, use our names. There's a part of me that's like, you know what? How dare you to think that you have a monopoly on grief or care about these kids? I give a fuck about them. That's why I'm writing this. He does too. That's why we're doing this. You don't have a monopoly on this. No matter what bullshit you've been smoking of your own that you grew and convinced yourself, the lies you've told yourself, I'm sure you do care on some level. That's fine, but you sure as shit don't have a monopoly on it. And you don't get to be actively get in the way of people who are fighting for that. And to throw up these bullshit lies about him, about me, about whatever, to do that just to protect the lies you've told yourself or your reputation.
It's also an
whatever.
occupational hazard that I keep seeing people who act like, they can go get a job working for effectively government. You work for the state. Okay. And in many cases, if that's the only employer you've ever had, if you haven't worked in the private sector where you can be fired for cause on a dime, it's like, or for no cause, just bye, you're gone. There's this notion that, they forget they're public servants. They forget that it's an occupational hazard, that when you are put in, you have this privilege, that you have these children in your care, their physical, intellectual, and emotional development is in your care for all those hours a day. And there's risk involved. There is risk that you exchange risk for benefit. The benefit is you have a regular salary, a generous pension, lots of benefits, a union to protect you, that you're not going to be fired without cause. There's all kinds of things like that. But the risk you assume is that if you don't do your job right, bad things can happen and you will be held accountable because you have to answer to the public, theoretically, right?
Yeah.
And I keep hearing this is like, like there's such a sense of entitlement that how dare you criticize me? I occupy space.
Yeah.
As a teacher. Yeah. How dare you ask me to do something well? I'm here and you're not. It's like, you didn't ask me to take your place. You literally asked for that job. You're taking all the benefits that come with that job. And now you want to act like just being there, like just breathing in and out in that physical space is doing the job. And it's not.
And obfuscate the responsibility that comes with that. We have a responsibility to them. Like Stephen talked about mandatory reporting of educational neglect. They have a responsibility. The question that I always say, the question is not, is it easy? Is it fun? Is it comfortable? The question should always be, is it right? Everything else is secondary to, is it right?
Don't
do the right thing.
The job.
Yeah.
And this bit about, like, well, you gave, you used our names. Like, again, y'all are public employees.
Yeah.
Your names, your salary is it's public knowledge. I can go online and look up what you're paid. This is not a secret. If the parent drops the kid off at the school, they know what physical person is in charge of their child or what set of people. This is not a secret. Your right to privacy, what you do on the job, doesn't exist. It, by the way, doesn't really exist if you hold a private sector job.
Yeah.
You don't have some magical privacy bubble that is around you while you're on the job.
Especially
as your clients.
If you have information to corroborate law breaking, right?
That's
you don't
correct.
Get to say, leave me out of it.
This notion that they have all these, special rights. It's like, no, I don't have that right as a private sector employee. If I screw over if something goes wrong and my client paid for a service and they didn't get it, whatever, I promise you, I can't hide behind a right to privacy to investigate what I did in the 8 hours I was supposedly working for them. And this notion that they are like the special snowflakes protected is so infuriating.
So
you weren't looking for that. You guys were sticking your necks out at any point in time during the course of the complaint or the request for investigation. Information could have been dredged up or found out that, you sent an email or you did something that impugned you dropped the ball somewhere. That could have happened. You drew attention to yourselves.
Yeah.
You're the guy who writes the plan, right? Comes up with the system, right, Stephen?
That's correct.
At some point, somebody could have theoretically come back and said, well, thank you for filing this complaint, asking for this investigation. We actually found, you may not have been aware of it, but you dropped the ball on these 3 occasions. Could have happened. Didn't. Wasn't the case. But I'm just saying, people don't tend to file complaints when they've got something to hide.
Yep. And if you do file a complaint and it's riddled with like provable, like factual errors, it shows that you are trying to hide something, right? So this complaint that she filed, here's the icing on the cake. All right. You ready for this, Deb? This is almost elegant how completely just transparently bankrupt this is. So Stephen filed his initial complaints, and the complaints that I filed as well were filed under our district policy. It's like 5041, something like that. And it's the grievances and complaint policy, right?
Right.
It's under section 5, which is the personnel policies. So that's where we filed it. And within that policy is it says, okay, all this has to start at an informal level. And if the people can't work it out, then it escalates up and up from there. So now he's also argued, they've told him multiple times, like, hey, you didn't do this at an informal level, even though they can't prove that, he'll say, actually, here's all these informal times or whatever. So they've manipulated this to hell and back to not listen to his complaints. And they did the same thing with mine. What they say in this February 7th document is that her complaint, because one of his responses was, where's the informal level? What are you talking about? Like, why is this not being handled informally? This is all news to me, right? Like, I didn't know anything about this. In fact, if I remember right, didn't you say that the special ed director said he's never heard you say anything bad about this person ever at any point in time?
Right. Yeah. He also conveyed that he didn't think there would be any evidence to support her claims, which is, a pretty brazen thing to say in terms of him receiving this complaint.
So in this February 7th document that he got, they say that the school district will be following procedures outlined in policy 4021, prohibiting harassment, intimidation, and bullying. So that's a different policy. Okay. So what is that? So we look up policy 4021. It's found in section 4 of our school board policies. You know what the title of section 4 is?
What?
Pupil services. This policy is in there along with graduation requirements, field trip forms, suspension and expulsion stuff, medication and vaccination. It's a student policy. This is for students. So, of course, there's no clause in there for an informal level because that shit doesn't happen with students. They take it to teachers. When you look at how policy 4021 says to resolve accusations of harassment, bullying, and intimidation, it's you got to contact the parent or guardians of the accused. A teacher collects it. The person who, so it says it's all done. The first thing, there's an intake form, Form A. So I find Form A on the website, on the school district's website. Form A is just a brief thing. It's actually something we've filled out probably dozens of times at the middle school whenever something would happen. And there's a thing in there where it's like, who are the accusers? And then when it's talking about who's being accused, it says accused students. Students. This is a fucking policy for students. And so she is using this policy. Not only that, the district is allowing her to use this policy. They say, we will be following the procedures outlined in policy 4021. Oh yeah, are they using document A? Document A, accused student, Stephen over here, they call his mom? What the fuck are you talking about, right? That tells you how brazen these people are. They don't give a shit. They will do whatever they have to do. Do whatever they have to do to slander this man, to get him out of here. They don't care.
Well, they've written it down. Now it's libel.
Right. Yeah.
It's not just slander. Yeah. Now it's libel.
And they're letting all this happen. And this HR guy, he talks, he's like, I'm part of this also, like this is so fucking corrupt, Deb. I'm getting a little animated here because it's just that type of thing is so transparent to me, where it's just like, that's where it and there's a good side of this where I say, these people are clearly grasping at straws because reality bats last. We're telling the truth. We have the truth on our side. So the fact that
in order for reality to bat last, you guys got to get in front of like a judge. Like you've got to get your evidence, which is from everything I've heard and now 3 videos totaling at least probably 6 hours. If I were an attorney, I would represent you because it is so obvious. But they're counting on, and everybody in the audience, I want you to hear this. The district is counting on them just being Goliath and these guys being David and not having the means to take this as far as it goes. We've seen this how many times in the last 2 years?
Oh my God.
People having legitimate claims, legitimate gripes with school districts, whether it's parents, teachers, people like yourselves, and it can't go anywhere because you need a lawyer and you need to pay a lawyer.
So is there anything you want to add before I kind of give some bright side?
No,
news?
please go ahead. Well, I would. Yeah, actually, if I might. So there's one other important thing here. The person who is helping her with this complaint and writing all this is the same HR director that failed to do my investigation in 2020. Same HR director that had 2 other complaints filed for biased investigations, failed investigations. And here's an important connection. If you remember at my meeting with my superintendent, where he offered to have this HR director go back and interview people, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I believe that superintendent and the HR director had full knowledge that this other employee had come forth with this complaint. So the reason why he wanted the HR director to go back and interview is because he would have then be able to use all that information that she's brought forth. In other words, they're not telling me this at all. That the offer to go back and do this wasn't genuine. It was incredibly disgenuine, because I think they already had the complaint and had developed the complaint from the other employee. So it was a trick. It was, we've already got this. We're holding it in the wings. It's out there. We've got it hidden. We're going to spring it on you if we really feel like we needed to discredit you again. But that's telling that my superintendent is offering to have the guy who's failed to do 3 investigations already, one an incredibly important Title IX investigation, and who also has been conversing with this other employee for probably a couple of months now to write this complaint, and no one's telling me any of this information. And that's the last connection I want to make. Go ahead, Ed, in terms of some.
So what I'll say is I found the place where the HR guy said, or where he outlines this, because you mentioned about how he offered. Says, so I know this is going back a little bit, but this is just, it's worth knowing. Says, you and this teacher, addressing Stephen, in late February, early March, they interviewed these people in late February, early March. However, the district was unable to finish this investigation due to COVID-19 and the shutdown of in-person learning. Brian, potato, summary notes indicate that he was unable to interview you because of spring break and, quote, the district moving to remote learning and work following the spring break holiday, which is, of course, bullshit. It's like, he could have done that over Zoom, like how they're doing all this stuff.
Right.
This is the next sentence that the superintendent says. In a meeting to discuss this complaint, I offered to tie up the investigation and have Brian conduct an interview with you and others you may suggest, but you did not accept my offer.
Yeah.
So he talks about all the shit that happened in spring 2020 after the spring break and how they couldn't do that. And the superintendent follows it up with, and I offered to have him go back and do this stuff, but you refused. Again, he applies a conversation in December 2021 to a thing in 2020. Okay. It's brazen. They're using, children's policies. This is so brazen. So to your point about the lawyer, well, first I'll give a few bright side things. One is, we found out, was this a week or 2 ago, that the superintendent is resigning. No explanation given. I read the article, the newspaper article about it, and there is no mention of where he's going next. Normally, if they're going somewhere else, that they have, like an example would be actually the not Northam. Who's the guy in Virginia, the good governor who was elected? Youngkin. Youngkin poached our state superintendent to go there to fight CRT stuff. When they wrote about that, they wrote about her going to fight the CRT stuff in Virginia, right? In that Virginia? I think so. There is no mention of why he's leaving or where he's going. He just announces that he's resigning. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but there's a part of me that likes to think that between the email and the complaints and stuff, that he's being pushed out. Also, he's the one who had the back of this piece of shit principal at the middle school. And so maybe his last, his support is going to be gone too. So that's a good thing, right?
That's good. I like to believe good wins out in the end.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's
Even if the
what
end is a little too far away for my taste.
I agree. And what I started to
And
say
it doesn't
earlier,
help the kids today, which
that's
really
exactly right.
pisses me off.
Is that when these people are grasping at straws in such a clear and transparent way, and they're willing to lie in such an open and transparent way, I mean, you only say, put this in here, that you're using this policy if you assume that he's either too dumb to look it up or that he can't do anything about it, right? Is that they're grasping at straws, and I think they're going to find that some of those straws are rattlesnake tails, because they don't have anything else. It's all they have is bullshit, because whenever the truth is the thing you're trying to fight, you have to manufacture all this stuff. It's just, I think it's a losing battle in the long run. So on the positive side, well, actually, there's a couple things other than what I just mentioned. One is, actually, before I say that, before I get to the two other positive things, I do want to bring it back to the thing I said in the beginning, and that we touched on in the middle, about the kids, and that this is about the kids. Again, at no point in this, the only people that are bringing up the kids are us. As you pointed out, this is not anything these people care about. They might care about it on some visceral human level. I'm not saying that they actively hate kids. However, they are transparently choosing their own interest over that of these students who, as you pointed out, they have a responsibility to. Not just like vocationally, but I think ethically, morally, anyway. And that's what's so disheartening about this. Is that, like you said, like Steven's mentioned, like, as all this is happening and as just this bullshit is piling up that we have to deal with, these kids are languishing. How many other kids are there like that? Like the ones that I mentioned before, mentioned my email.
Oh, it's all over the country.
And so
you guys are like lifting up a rock that, it's everywhere.
It is, and it's a tragedy that, and it's really unfortunate that there is so much. It's not just active malice, but it's indifference, and it's just selfishness and cowardice, I think, all combined.
Well, that ends up being malice, though,
It does.
because
It has a malicious impact
when your job is to do the opposite of be indifferent.
Yeah.
And you take any other path, then how is that not malice? Like, there just comes a point where you can't claim that, issues. I mean, you just can't do that. Don't do the job.
Yeah.
The honest thing then is to resign, or say, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. This isn't what I want to do in life. I mean, look, I could have respect for that. I could have respect for people go into teaching, go into school administration work or whatever, and realize, wow, this is much bigger than I thought it was. And I want to do it. I don't want to do it. I just want to push paper from one side of the desk to the other without affecting someone's life in the balance. And I'm going to go somewhere else. Yeah. That is a more respectable thing to do than to continue to occupy a position like this, especially when so many of them, and it's usually the ones most loudly proclaiming what saints they are, that are the most guilty of this kind of stuff. Where I think just today I saw something on Twitter where teachers were comparing themselves to heart surgeons.
Oh my God.
And saying, would you want an adjunct heart surgeon doing your surgery? And
the kind of heart surgeon that leaves a scalpel in your chest cavity.
Because they're complaining about alternative pathways to teacher certifications. They want to have a monopoly on how you become a teacher when they're demonstrably not doing the job and we have a shortage, right? So you don't get to have it every which way. You don't get to complain about what you're paid, complain about how you're treated, act like you're the most moral, caring people, refer to the kids as our kids, my kids, and all these statements, and then be like, what? Not my problem. What? That's his fault, her fault, their fault, the parents' fault. It's always somebody else's fault. And this is, I'm going to keep doing these kinds of shows and keep trying to expose it, because I would like to see a teaching profession filled with people who actually care about the kids,
and who
do exist. They're out there. You guys are there,
and who are competent
are competent and caring. Just the demonstration of caring is not competence, as you said at the outset.
Yeah, and what I would say also is that what you're describing about people who would admit they can't do it, that requires humility, which is something a lot of people don't have. I will say, people can say, think this, if maybe this is coincidence, maybe not, but the person who filed this complaint against Stephen, wildly progressive, one of the most people who will say all those right buzzwords about, you know, empathy and compassion and want to look out for the marginalized. And,
This is my shocked face.
right, exactly, right. And so it's like, you know, maybe it's confirmation bias for me, I don't know, but it's, you know, it's kind of weird that, you know, the person who would check that progressive bubble in a heartbeat and talk about, you know, the first one to talk about how inclusive and caring they are is the one who is actively lying now about, you know, about people that would have called her friends, and that's really fucked up.
Just be wary of performative virtue.
Right, yeah, which is
what
what most virtue is these days. But so things on the bright side. The first one is our school board, and I'll just tell you on the onset. I mean, you know how cynical I am about this stuff. I don't have a lot of hope for, you know, school boards making changes, but if there was sometimes there are perfect storms where something could happen if the will was there, if the energy and the stuff was there. So our school board is now tasked with hiring a new superintendent, and they have a majority block of seats that are up for re-election this year. So we're going to a meeting tonight for our county Republicans. You know, neither of us are Republican, but it's like we don't really have anyone else. Right. To talk to the people who are talking about running and to talk about the idea of a block of candidates, not just a few, you know, and that means some people who want to do it won't get to do it because it's got to be the block, and what that would look like and why that might be important, and see if they're interested in it. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But with that, then that could have the potential to have a say in who the new superintendent is, or at least directing a new superintendent, getting rid of this principal at the middle school, getting rid of this garbage HR guy. I mean, there's so many things that could come from this if the interest is there. And, you know, Steven's had some conversations. I've had some conversations with people who are part of like the candidate choosing process, and it seems like there is some interest there. You know, but when the rubber meets the road, who knows? But that's one thing. The other thing is that, so there was multiple times, especially at the beginning when Steven was summarizing the stuff and he mentioned like my lawyer, you know, or my lawyer this, you know, really there's been multiple different lawyers who were involved at different times, and they're almost always involved to the point of just writing letters and stuff. That's what he found with the last one. What was it you ended up with? I mean, I think you got a refund, wasn't like a $5,000 retainer or something like that for them to like write 2 letters. But you ended up getting a refund or some shit.
Well, I did. I mean, you know, it's a small town. And so actually finding an attorney that does this work specifically and then one that is free is nearly impossible in Wyoming. I mean, it's very difficult to find. But that is true. That law firm, you know, they abandoned my case on 3 separate occasions. We missed important deadlines to file things. It was just a real travesty. But yes, I managed to get a refund from those guys for some of those issues.
And so, and prior to that, you know, it was the union who didn't do anything. By the way, that law firm, whenever they first talked to him, was like, yeah, rah, sold a bill of goods of like, well, we'll find the old lawsuit against the principal at the middle school. Anyway. So it's kind of been like, well, all hope is lost. It's just, I mean, that's why he said he wrote 200 pages probably over the course of this year, because that's it. It's just like, that's the only tool available. So I can't remember. How did you get recommended this other lawyer that it turns out you have a connection with?
I got a reference and called someone that handled, you know, workforce type law. And he asked why I wasn't speaking with someone in my town who does that sort of law. And I didn't know. I knew she was, but I didn't know she performed that sort of law. So I gave her a call, and that was it. But it was luck. That was just random luck that I ran into someone who knew, because I'd called 30, 40 people prior to that, and just couldn't get any interest or somebody who had the skills.
So, so there's a lawyer. She's interested. She's articulated, I'll take the case. Yeah. She's aggressive as hell. Just mean in all the ways you want someone to be mean, right? Like that's a compliment. Right. And who wants to go after the district. Her standard flat rate fee is $10,000. She usually wants that up front. However, she's agreed that she would take, because her grandson is, I think, friends with his son. And I think because of that special connection has agreed to just, okay, can you do half up front, you know, and then maybe make payments on the other half. His next meeting with her is this Friday, so in 3 days, to basically where he can say, yes, I can afford to pay you. Yes, I can do this, or no, I cannot, or whatever. He's put his e-bike up for sale and is trying to sell that. That'll probably cover some of the costs. doesn't
Mhm.
want to have to sell, the guns, but, do what he has to do. If I have to, I'll do a skimpy car wash for people. I don't think I'd make a lot of money. Be like Justin Long in Dodgeball, if anyone gets that reference. But yeah, so that's kind of where it's at. Is I'm
Right.
actually
And you
really
guys, and just so the audience knows, like we were talking before the show about them setting up a
give,
give,
send,
send,
go,
go, but
and
as you know, they got hacked.
yep, by
So
the
we
same
can't
kinds
even,
of people. By the way,
right,
by the same kinds of people who are opposing like this. And make no mistake, the people who hacked Give, Send, Go are the
mm,
same kinds of people who will use a student policy to try and go after an
right.
adult staff member for bullshit reasons. I mean, it's the same ideological cancer that is
Yeah.
doing that. But to your point, yeah, we had set
Yeah.
up a
So
Give,
we,
Send, Go, but it's
I
inaccessible
would
right now.
love to be able to send everybody in the audience to make their donations at a give, send, go, but you just can't even set up an account right now because of the hacking. So what's the interim plan? What can people do to help?
Um, we could try to set up a Venmo or something.
Okay.
If that's something people feel comfortable. I mean, maybe even just take a quick poll with people who are watching. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't know
I
if
mean,
that's
would
something.
people give to a Venmo in the time being or
I don't know.
something?
But if people are interested, we want them to have a way of doing that. We don't know when Give, Send, Go is going to be back up. We've got it ready to go and set up.
Right.
If we need to set up a Venmo or a PayPal or something, we can do that today. That was just something we were kind of on the fence about because we wanted to be as transparent as possible, and I feel like those
Sure.
sites are kind of where you get that. We had originally talked about GoFundMe, and then they did that stuff with the truckers. We're like, nope, not
Yeah,
gonna
we
use
don't
them.
want to.
Screw those
Yeah, and that's
guys.
I would say
Yeah,
like you could even have a set up a cause or a page on Facebook, but that would probably get shut down because
yeah,
the unfortunately the people you're fighting have friends in high places,
yeah.
if not directly, then indirectly. Any parent, any teacher that's speaking out against the system
Right.
is now, getting pushback. And isn't it weird that the people who used to be for the little guy, right? Progressives,
Allegedly,
people
yeah.
on the left, whatever, that would like fight the man, fight the system, fight the government, fight authority, are now the first ones to line up behind the authority and say, like, sit down, shut up, know your place, and all that. And, shh, don't say anything. And this is, like I said, this is especially egregious because there are kids' lives caught in the balance. And we know of at least one, and that's just the one we know of
Well, at least one
that
dead one. I mean,
that
I'm
one that's
sure
what I'm saying, one
probably wish they
attempt,
were.
one successful suicide, and that's just what we know about. How many countless thousands of other kids who are in these types of situations, and that doesn't mean the ones who are in who have behavioral supports in place or IEPs. There are also kids who don't have an IEP but are suffering at the hands of abusive teachers who are doing other things to them. So, I profile a lot of that on this channel. You guys just have a paper trail. There's a lot of situations out there where nobody, I know parents have contacted me saying, I'm trying to put a case together because my kid is getting abused in the school and I don't even know where to turn.
Right. Right.
Can't find a lawyer to take the case. It is, like I said, it's part of the problem inherent in the system because the system is so big. The system protects the system.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. When I filed my first complaints in 2012 or so, I got an odd response. I had a story put in the newspaper. We talked about this, and I got this odd response in the newspaper in terms of my story. But it was a civil rights attorney from the East Coast who was calling just to say, my daughter was in a similar situation, and I'm an attorney who fights this sort of thing, and I just was curious and wanted to talk to you about your experiences. But one of the things that happened a decade ago, I called all of these advocacy groups that provide support for this. And they were all surprised that an employee from the school was calling for the advocacy, and they were all parent groups. Like I could not get, they were just as perplexed, almost like they thought it was a trick that I was going to infiltrate their group as a school district employee. And they had no process for that. Which is unfortunate because, as a mental health worker, I collect data. That's what I do well. And I collect it and respond every time consistently. And I just thought that I could have, it would have been a good case to take in terms of having a paper trail, having this information, following up constantly. But it is difficult to find people to support you in this manner.
Yeah,
I can get
very
emotional
difficult.
support. That's fine. I have friends and family, but as we've talked about a bunch, the district can do what they want until we're in front of a judge. That's the changing.
Well,
That's
that's
the
when, like
factor
you
here.
said, Truman, like that's where, reality has a way of doing its thing. Like
Right.
you can't fight reality. So, all right. Well, what I
I have
can
a
do is
Venmo
this.
set up. I just set one up.
You set up a Venmo?
I
Okay.
did.
So you can put it in the comments right now. I can put it in the description box after we're done. I can reshare this video with the Venmo in the comments of various platforms. I mean, I can do what I can to promote it. I hope you guys watching now can help us promote it. I would love to see you get your 10 grand together some kind of way
Yeah. Thank
just
you.
to bring this forward, because I have a feeling if we could just get that much done,
Yeah.
it, it what are you hoping for as your outcome? Like, are you hoping for a settlement personally? Because they've defamed you. I mean, it's going to be hard
Right.
for you to
Right.
work. So
Right.
you deserve something personally. But also, I mean, are you kind of hoping for more resignations and more sunlight on this whole process, just in general?
I would like more exposure and more accountability to force. I think it'll take a political, illegal process to force the school district to make the changes it needs to make. Um, New types of leadership, changes to policy, any number of things. So people like myself can get in and do our jobs to make sure we're helping those kids. And like we said, that's the bottom line. But if these processes impact the adults who are supposed to help kids from doing it, then the kids suffer in the end, and they can't progress as they need to. So, I think some accountability for that. A type of settlement would be great. We would have some additional funds then to keep working on this. No matter what changes, if we work hard and get a settlement of some sort or some legal rulings to change things, this is something that'll just keep coming up. It's not as if that'll change this district or any forever, and it'll be great. We'll be back in this space at some point, but hopefully it's a space that has been sort of recreated after these particular interactions where we can problem solve and not have to necessarily take legal action.
Yeah, and if we're able to make those changes, then it's just a matter of it's maintenance at that point.
Right.
It's not fighting
Yeah.
back; it's just maintenance, maintaining the integrity and keeping the corrupt stuff out.
Right.
So
Exactly.
I changed the one I had before. My previous one was at Lesbian Seagull, but I didn't think people would want to give to that, so I changed it to it's a Beavis and Butthead reference. To at Justice for Students, to see if you can find that. I mean, see if can you find it?
At Justice for Okay, let me look on my Venmo. Okay.
And then for the name, I just put Truman-Stephen Fighting for Kids.
Okay, so at Justice for Students.
Yeah, see if you can find that on your Venmo, please.
Okay. Let's see, where do you find the search?
Try this. Try taking your phone and scanning this QR code. Pop up. Can you do that?
With the camera, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it works. Okay. So then it goes, okay. Yep. Truman-Stephen Fighting for Justice. Okay. Very cool.
Yep.
Very,
Deb,
very cool.
One of the way this will work is the flat fee that this attorney charges. She specializes in this area, and this will result in a very large complaint that'll go to the state and partly to the federal government. Once we get to that point with the state, we can appeal to either have the state, if they find for us, help us resolve this in some way, or they'll give us a letter that gives us the right to sue. We can't go to court directly on this until we go through the process with the state. And then the court part of this would be a contingency model where we would not need any more funding for that. That would be up to the that part of the negotiation with the attorney at that point. So this gets us all the way to that point, the big filing, some sort of ruling by the state, and then we would have the right to sue after that, as long as they side with us, to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she said that, I think, didn't she say this covers, what'd she say, 300 hours? Or how many hours of, not 300, how many hours of work? She's
She's a $300 an hour lawyer. This covers 30 hours of work
30
to
hours,
put this
yeah.
together. And she says usually it's 45 to 50 hours to do it, but she charges for the 30, and that's it. So I kind of like having that flat fee without having the hours piling up and not knowing where I stand. And so it's
Yeah,
kind of a
it's
bad way to
good.
look at
Yeah.
this.
Well,
It's
all
a good
right,
goal.
guys. So hopefully, we put Truman hyphen Stephen fighting for kids.
Yeah, I'll put that QR code up again. You know, if anyone wants to do it, we appreciate it. I mean, anything
it worked
counts.
for me.
Even if you just take a picture of it, share it, something like this. That's where this is going. This is going to pay this lawyer again. He's selling his bike. I don't have shit to sell. I'm poor. Remember, they fired my ass. I'm working for the post office now. So like, but whatever we can do, that's where this is going. And that's why I say there's a glimmer of hope here, is because she wants to take the case. The case has always been easy, really, in my opinion. Maybe it's always been at least straightforward. I don't know if easy is the right word, but it's been pretty straightforward. And it's just it's finding the people who are interested, who feel like, yeah, I want to fight for this. I want to fight for these kids. And it feels like we finally found someone who wants to
I'll do what I can. And if you guys do get a Give, Send, Go going, please share that with me and I'll update it. But in the meantime, time is of the essence, right? You've got like 3 days.
Yeah.
Yep.
3 days to let her know if he can do it. So the more we get that message out, and I know it's a lot to ask people to watch 2 hours and 25 minutes of a show.
Yeah.
So the summary simply is that Stephen is fighting a district that has been abusing kids and lying about it and covering it up and demonizing the people who are trying to protect them.
Yep.
That's really the summary. They've been, just lying about, covering up, and continuing on.
Yep.
So the kids, the bad teacher's still in there. The people who are doing these things are still doing it, and the expert who could help is being, falsely accused of things. So that's what the cause is. And it may not seem like it's near to you if it's because it's in Wyoming, but as I tell everybody, if something's happening in another state that's big like this, it can help set a precedent. It can put people on notice. People then get wind of it. These educators talk to each other nationwide. I promise you, they belong to associations that are national, and they start realizing that people are not only willing to dig in and fight, but are being successful. And their incentives shift.
Yep.
Remember, right now, the incentives are where they are because they're not afraid of Stephen.
Right.
They're afraid of different people. But we need to shift the balance of power so they're afraid of the people doing the good things.
Yep.
And then we take it back.
Can I just add something on to what you just said there? You talk about precedent. That is so important. One of the arguments that the union attorney made to me for why he could not take my case was some precedent. I can't remember what the name was, but he's like, because of this precedent, it's really, really hard for these things to be proven. So it'd be nice if we can get some precedent. Pardon me. I'm allergic to talking about the unions. But it'd be nice if we can get some precedent in the other direction where parents who are not having these IEPs run can say, right here, here's precedent. You have to do this. You have to do this. Here's what happens if you don't. So it's not just about us. Like you said, it's about establishing that precedent for the other people like us and the parents and the families out there.
Exactly. And that's how the incentives shift. We do nothing changes.
Yep.
Nothing
it just
changes.
Gets worse. Kids continue to get hurt is what that nothing changes means.
Exactly. Yep. Well, I will do what I can. And so keep me posted on this. Fingers crossed. I sent my contribution. I hope it's not much, but hopefully others will follow suit. And thank you so much for continuing to share your story using this platform. I wish I were bigger. I wish I had more eyeballs to give you, but hopefully we can spread it around. And I just wish you guys all the best. I wish you success. Okay. So everybody watching, please get this information out. Like I said, give them a little speech of what this is about. And hopefully we can get enough support for you. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Deb, very much for your efforts.
So very welcome. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Once again, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and you can join my locals at thereasonwelearned.locals.com. Truman's at returntoreason.locals.com. And also you have a YouTube channel under Return to Reason.
Yep.
And he's my Mundane Mind on Twitter.
Yep. My Mundane Mind.
Okay. My Mundane Mind. All right. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful
day.
Deb.
Thanks.
You're very welcome.